Chapter 130. The carriages continued to move forward. This time, without Gong Yimo's interference, they moved very quickly. In less than 10 days, they reached the capital. She had not been out for long, but when she came back, she felt that everything had changed. Moreover, she did not know if it was her misperception, but she felt that everyone in the capital was in danger. There was no joy of celebrating the new year. Instead, there was a sense of crisis. Gong Yimo looked for a while, then put down the curtain and closed her eyes in deep thought. After the carriages entered the city, because they were very low-key, they did not attract too much attention from the common people. Just like that, they went through the palace gates, while Gong Yimo stayed outside to wait. After Gong Yimo left, Gong Dai seemed to have changed into another person. He calmly and indifferently swept his gaze over the crowd. Wherever his gaze landed, everyone lowered their heads. Everyone was muttering in their hearts. The people they had met along the way were indeed an illusion. The current Gong Dai was the real him. Gong Dai did not seem to feel their fear and smiled slightly. For this journey to the west, everyone has performed meritorious service. When I see Imperial Father later, I will report to him. When the people who came along heard this, they all expressed their loyalty and smiled fawningly. All of this is because of your Highness's guidance. We do not dare to claim the credit. We are all willing to follow your Highness to death. Only then did Gong Dai smile with satisfaction. His smile gave people an indescribable pressure. Those black, jade-like eyes were like a ball of thick ink, revealing an endless threat. Don't worry what you deserve. You will only get more. It was obviously a good thing, but everyone's heart trembled. Almost at the same time, they thought of the person who betrayed Gong Dai and wanted to inform the palace. He was tied behind a horse by Gong Dai, and then the horse galloped quickly. And that person was dragged for more than 10 li just like that. When they stopped, his body was already covered with wounds, revealing his white bones. He was only left with his last breath. And this was not the end. Gong Dai ordered people to hold a sky burial for that person in front of them. The scene was bloody and cruel, becoming a nightmare that they could not get rid of. Many of these people were spies planted by other people in the palace. However, over the past year, they had long been manipulated into submission by Gong Dai. Gong Dai was rich, very rich, and had given them many unexpected benefits. However, his methods were even more cruel. Anyone who offended him or betrayed him would face consequences that made them tremble in fear. Therefore, when the young man in front of them said that they would get more if they followed him, they didn't doubt it at all. However, they knew that if they betrayed him, they would end up worse than the others. Gong Dai waved his hand in annoyance, and they immediately quieted down. The convoy continued to move forward. On the palace road, they met another group of palanquins. From the looks of it, they were the private palanquins of the women of the officials' families. Su Miaolan originally had a lot on her mind, but after hearing the maidservant's report, she lifted the curtain to take a look. All she saw was a pitch-black carriage with a simple design that gave people a dignified feeling. It looked ordinary, but the 4 horses pulling the carriage were all rare horses. Her mind was like lightning, and she almost immediately guessed who the person was. When she thought of the 9th prince who had made a miraculous contribution in the West Province, her beautiful eyes moved. She ordered people to make way for her and helped her down the palanquin. Gong Dai was originally resting with his eyes closed when he suddenly heard a sweet female voice. The voice was low and gentle, but it was very seductive. He frowned slightly. He really didn't have the patience to deal with those insignificant people. However, when he heard her introduce herself as the legitimate daughter of the Zhan country marquis, his fingers moved. Wasn't that the woman who wanted to bully the royal sister at the tea party? He opened his eyes, and a cold light seemed to flash through them. His snow-white slender hand lifted the curtain of the carriage, and someone immediately took over. His cold and exquisite appearance, which was like a splash ink painting, fell into Su Miaolan's eyes and shocked her. It had only been a year and a half, but the unremarkable prince of the past had actually become so elegant. Su Miaolan felt panic in her heart when she was glanced at by that pair of black, jade-like eyes. She quickly bowed. "Your humble servant Su greets the 9th prince." Her voice was sweet like the sound of nature, and she displayed her most beautiful bearing in front of Gong Dai. She was glad that she was dressed very uniquely today, which accentuated her beauty. While she was bowing, she didn't forget to glance at him shyly. She seemed to be affectionate but reserved. If it was an ordinary youth, wouldn't they be moved? Gong Dai sat in the carriage and didn't move, nor did he call for her to get up. His cold and unique voice was slightly raised. "You are Su Miaolon?" Su Miaolon's face turned pale. How could her maiden name be casually spoken by him? There were so many men present. Feeling Gong Dai's hostility towards her, Su Miaolon almost immediately thought of Gong Yimo. That's right, Gong Dai was brought up by Gong Yimo. Naturally, he would be somewhat dissatisfied with her. Thinking of this, her originally stunning good impression of Gong Dai faded a lot. However, she didn't forget that Gong Dai's return this time was a great merit. Therefore, she gritted her teeth and pitifully lowered her head. "Yes, your humble servant's maiden name is Miaolon." Gong Dai picked up a strand of hair and gently twirled it around his fingertips. The corner of his mouth slightly hooked up, and his smile was somewhat malicious. "Let me guess. You entered the palace this time because the Empress summoned you?" Su Miaolon was startled. She didn't know how the ninth prince, who had just returned to the capital, knew of her movements. She lowered her head and whispered yes. Her answer made Gong Dai happy. His original intention of punishing her suddenly faded because he thought of a wonderful game. He looked down at the other party's weak body that was shivering in the cold wind and said in a low voice, "Raise your head." That cold and dignified voice made Su Miaolon feel danger. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a little afraid of this prince who was 3 years younger than her. Hearing this, she hurriedly raised her head. However, she originally wanted to show a flattering smile, but because of fear, her entire face looked very stiff. Gong Dai glanced at her and leaned back as if it hurt his eyes. However, a trace of a sneer appeared on his lips. The capital's #1 beauty? His voice was full of disdain, and it was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. "She's only a so-so. Bai Sheng, let's go." "Yes, Your Highness." Bai Sheng looked at Su Miaolon with some sympathy. She had offended the princess, but was lightly let off by His Highness. Then, what awaited her would definitely be an even more terrible punishment. However, Su Miaolon almost ground her teeth to pieces because of this sentence. What did she care about the most? Other than her identity, it was her face. However, this damned Gong Dai actually said that she was only a so-so. It was as if he had torn her clothes in front of everyone. She felt so wrong that she only wanted to cry. However, a raging flame ignited in her heart. Extremely unwilling, she glared at the carriage that had gone far away before she was helped up by the maidservant beside her. It was only because she was only 13 and didn't know the ways of men and women. Just wait. In the future, she would definitely make Gong Dai fall under her skirt. Chapter 131. Emperor Gong was a little impatient. He didn't know why, but during this period of time, the imperial court was turbulent. None of the princes and ministers were easy to deal with. Fortunately, the crown prince was a good person. During his recuperation period, he still shared his worries. Moreover, this once disliked ninth son had quietly made such a great contribution. So when he heard that Gong Dai had returned, Emperor Gong smiled for the first time. He was looking forward to seeing his son. He sighed in his heart. Gong Yimo really has a good eye. Her elder brother and younger brother were all good. Unfortunately, Emperor Gong couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Gong Yimo. He hadn't found Gong Yimo's body and had been worried about it. Although he heard some suspected news about Gong Yimo from time to time, every time he searched, he found that it was fake. At this time, Gong Dai came. Because it wasn't time for the imperial court, Emperor Gong met him privately in Zhaoyang Hall. Seeing that Gong Dai had grown into a teenager, he sighed slightly. His children had grown up, and he was also old. He first wantonly praised Gong Dai, then asked cautiously, "About him, or? You've heard about it, right?" Hearing this, Gong Dai's face showed a trace of grief. Then he firmly said, "This son firmly believes that royal sister will not die." His words made Emperor Gong's heart sour. "This matter, it's imperial father's fault. Don't blame Imperial Father. Gong Dai suddenly interrupted him, his pair of ink-black eyes fixed on Emperor Gong. Finally, he closed his eyes and said, I know Royal Sister's thoughts. If Royal Sister was here, she would certainly understand you. So, I also understand. Good. Emperor Gong was quite moved. He felt as if the knot in his heart was untied. You really are a child who grew up with her. You're also a good child. Gong Dai lowered his head and didn't speak. Emperor Gong felt that Gong Dai's heart was still full of resentment and pain. Thinking of this, he felt very guilty and secretly made a decision. When he bestowed rewards tomorrow, he had to give Gong Dai more compensation. So he didn't continue this topic and just comforted her gently. She will appear one day. You go and rest first. As he spoke, his voice became louder. He patted his shoulder and laughed. You have made a great contribution this time. I will reward you well. Tomorrow morning will be the day of your rise. Gong Dai forced a smile. Yes, thank you, Imperial Father. He talked to the Emperor for a while and then presented the gift he had prepared. The Emperor was very pleased and let him leave early. In fact, the Emperor should be glad. If he hadn't been in the barren miasma plain when the news of the Royal Sister's death came, he would have gone crazy. Fortunately, Gong Yimo had arrived in advance and had unknowingly saved a catastrophe. Out of Zhaoyang Hall, Gong Dai didn't want to stay a second longer. He wanted to leave the palace, but he couldn't. He had to stay in the palace tonight. Not only did he have a lot of things to hand over, but he also had to record the details of the process. So even if he was anxious to return home, he could only endure. But he didn't expect that someone was more anxious than him. As soon as he left Zhaoyang Hall, he was stopped. Gong Chei's gaze carefully circled around the four people behind Gong Dai. Then he regretfully withdrew his gaze. He naturally knew that Gong Yimo wouldn't enter the palace at this time, but he still had some hope in his heart. Long time no see. Ninth brother, how have you been? Gong Chei had recovered his spirit. Although he still looked very weak, his smile was very gentle. But if one looked carefully, one would only feel that the smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. Gong Dai keenly felt a thread of hostility. He narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled again. He was devilishly handsome, and when he smiled, he was even more handsome. This made Gong Chei slightly jealous. He heard that young girls liked beautiful people. If Immerse stayed by his side for a long time, what would happen if she was enchanted by Gong Dai's appearance? Because he loved Gong Yimo, he thought that the entire world would fight with him. Gong Dai naturally became his imaginary enemy, but he didn't think that he would hit the nail on the head. Greetings, Crown Prince. I have to go pay respects to Imperial Grandmother, so I won't accompany you any longer. Gong Chei said calmly, no problem. I also have to go to Imperial Grandmother to talk about Fu Huang's birthday. Let's go together. Since he said so, Gong Dai naturally wouldn't refuse. But he looked at Gong Chei and smiled even more strangely. The two's gazes met. It looked calm and without ripples, but the attendants on both sides felt the undercurrent. They all lowered their heads and didn't dare to speak. In the end, they silently dismissed their attendants and walked together towards Hushi Palace where the Empress Dowager lived. One of them was calm, the other was cold, but they both had their own charm. When they walked together, it was instantly eye-catching. Gong Dai keenly felt that something was wrong. The people in the palace respected Gong Chei very much and even feared him. And in the past, Gong Chei was famous in the palace for being a good person. He was easy to talk to, and the people in the palace were not afraid of him. But now, it seemed that it had changed. Gong Chei also sighed in his heart. Gong Dai was so young, but he had made such a contribution. After tomorrow, he was afraid that everyone in the capital would know of his outstanding character. Gong Chei wasn't afraid that he would overshadow him, but, in Gong Yimo's eyes, he wanted to be the best. Thinking of his beloved, Gong Chei couldn't help but smile. He finally asked, Immerse, is she well? Gong Ju clenched his fists tightly at Gong Chei's affectionate greeting. In an instant, Gong Ju's body erupted with murderous intent, making Gong Chei feel cold. After a long time, Gong Ju sneered. What does her well have to do with you? When Gong Chei heard about Gong Yimo, he didn't have the mind to care about his disrespect. His eyes lit up and he blurted out, "Then where is she now? In the capital?" Gong Dai looked at Gong Chei's excited expression and couldn't help but mock. "Do you have the right to see her? In this year, she did so much for you. In the end, she was even forced to commit suicide by the emperor for you. What did you do? What right do you have to see her?" His words were merciless, making Gong Chei stunned. Gong Dai lowered his eyes and turned the jade ring on his finger, coldly saying, "Since you can't protect her, I ask Crown Prince not to bring trouble to her. After all, she has something that everyone wants in her hands. For this thing, she was forced to use the death escape technique to escape. There are so many eyes around you. If you go see her, it will only make her situation more dangerous. If I were you, I wouldn't do that." After Gong Dai finished speaking, he didn't even look at him and walked away, leaving Gong Chei standing there in a daze, as if he couldn't come back to his senses. Gong Dai was right. It was him who thought too simply. If he went to see her so rashly, her death escape technique would be useless. Imperial father and other brothers, for the sake of ambition, they would skin her alive. Chapter 132. Gong Chei clenched his fists tightly. Even though he was under the bright sun, he felt cold. A chill rushed to his head, making him feel as if he was in a cold lake and unable to breathe. But he just wanted to see her. He had been looking forward to Gong Dai's return day after day. Wasn't it just to see her? Now that the beauty was in the capital, he couldn't even see her. Others couldn't understand this heart-wrenching pain. Gong Dai saw that Gong Chei didn't follow him, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes. If only he could make Gong Chei disappear unknowingly. In this world, anyone who fought with him for the royal sister deserved to be killed by him. But when he thought of Su Miaolon, he was relieved. He would do his best to make this happen, because he knew very well that the royal sister wouldn't accept any kind of man. What the royal sister wanted was monogamy. When he thought of Gong Yimo, Gong Dai felt sweet again and went to Hushi Palace. The Empress Dowager had been worshipping Buddha all year round and didn't care about worldly affairs, so Gong Dai originally thought that he was just going through the motions. But after he finished speaking, the Empress Dowager didn't seem to have any intention of letting him leave. Gong Dai secretly frowned. He didn't want to stay here for too long. Gong Chei was called to Feng Chi Palace by the Empress's people in a daze. He had a bad premonition in his heart, but he still went. During this time, Empress Lu was a little afraid of her son. Gong Chei seemed to have transformed overnight. He used to be kind and benevolent, but now, in just over a month, he had used the emperor's hand to eradicate many people, and he even coaxed the emperor to feel guilty. His intelligence and methods were much better than before. Sometimes, the empress felt that she didn't know this son anymore. However, the benefits were also obvious. Because the Eastern Palace was stable, even her status had risen along with it. The matters of the harem were gradually becoming easier to handle. Although she was still a little busy, her life was much better than before. Upon seeing Gong Chei, the empress revealed a smile. Recently, she had experienced many happy events, and her entire face was glowing. Moreover, the emperor had also come several times. This made her, who was already in her 40s, have a faint hint of spring on her brows. Gong Chei handed the fur coat to a palace servant and walked over. Seeing the empress' appearance, he sighed in his heart. For a woman, no matter how much status, wealth, or children she had, it still couldn't compare to her husband's pity. He was still as gentle as before. His handsome face had a smile that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze, making people feel good about him. "Imperial Mother, why are you looking for me so urgently?" The empress smiled faintly and pulled him to the table. On the table, there was a mountain of files. Gong Chei looked at them and found that they were all files introducing the women of the court. He squinted his eyes, but Empress Lu didn't notice. She only thought about the past and smiled bitterly. "Chei, you should have chosen a concubine long ago. But before," she paused and shook her head, "don't mention it. Now that you are about to leave the capital and go to Huai River, before you go, you should settle the marriage. When you return to the capital, you can hold the wedding ceremony. It's a double blessing." The Empress's words left Gong Che rooted to the ground. He stared at the dossiers as though they would all disappear just like that. He didn't want to get married. Or rather, the person he wanted to marry wouldn't even appear on the list of concubines. Seeing that he didn't speak, the Empress thought of something. Her eyes flashed and she said with a smile, "Chair, now, you're almost 18 years old. Your brothers are all married at 15 to 60% of the time, and your sixth brother already has 2 children. The imperial family places great importance on heirs. You must make plans early." As she said that, she showed him the files on the top of the pile. These women are all daughters of aristocratic families of the right age. Not to mention their strong background, their appearance and temperament are all outstanding. For example, Su Miaolan. At this time, Gong Che finally found his voice. He forced a smile. "Imperial Mother, let's talk about this after I finish building the canal." Empress Lu glared at him. "It will be at least 2 years later when you finish building the tributary. If these women don't settle down early, where will Imperial Mother find the right person for you?" As she said that, she raised her eyebrows and asked with a strange expression, "Or, do you already have someone you like?" Gong Che couldn't answer her question. Smoke filled the room. Gong Dai hated the strong smell of sandalwood. He glanced at the bodhisattvas in the temple hall and sneered in his heart. He had done too many guilty things. No matter how many bodhisattvas there were, they couldn't make him feel at ease. There was no sound from behind the curtain for a long time. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes slightly. He didn't know what trick the Empress Dowager was playing. At this time, the royal sister must still be lazing in bed. He didn't know if Bai Shang had woken her up for dinner, but Bai Shang was also useless. He was definitely not the royal sister's opponent. At this time, a low cough was heard. Gong Dai quickly focused his mind. He heard the sound of the curtain and an old woman walked out of the dark temple hall. The Empress Dowager was not yet 60 years old. He didn't know if she was too worried. Her well-maintained face was actually accompanied by a head of silver hair. She was supported by people. When she saw Gong Dai, she smiled lovingly. "My grandson, you have grown so big. Come here, let me have a good look at you." Gong Ju walked over steadily. The Empress Dowager looked at him with a pair of shrewd eyes. The more she looked at him, the more satisfied she became. She praised him and pulled him to the side hall where the guests were received. After ordering the servants to serve the best tea, she let go of Gong Dai and smiled. "Now that you are a big child, did you encounter anything interesting during this year's journey to the west?" Gong Dai was too lazy to talk more. He just coldly replied, "Grandson went to provide relief. I didn't encounter anything interesting." His words made the Empress Dowager's smile slightly stiff. She looked at Gong Dai deeply and smiled. "So, you didn't meet any girl you like?" Gong Dai's mind was like lightning. He almost immediately understood what she wanted to do. The Empress Dowager was Lu Xianfei's aunt. She wanted to pull him to Lu Xianfei's side after seeing him gradually gaining power and making a great contribution. Without waiting for Gong Dai to speak, the Empress Dowager said, "Now that you are not young, it is time to find a wife. Pity, you don't have a mother to take care of things for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so passive." Gong Dai naturally wouldn't let her go on like this. He quickly said, "Grandson is still young. I don't know much about love. I just want to share father's worries and contribute to the Dayu state." His resistance once again made the Empress Dowager a little unhappy. She squeezed the prayer beads in her hand and sneered, "If you haven't experienced it, you won't be able to taste the good. It just so happens that Aijia has a little niece. She is virtuous and has a good appearance. Her family background is worthy of the imperial family. In Aijia's heart, the one I miss most is you." She said so. Gong Dai didn't know what was good for him if he refused again. He looked up and fixed his eyes on the Empress Dowager. Suddenly, he smiled. This smile made the originally low-key and luxurious side hall suddenly dim. The Empress Dowager's heart skipped a beat. "Since grandmother is so kind, would you allow grandson to see?" Chapter 134. The Empress was rooted to the spot by his words. When he talked about grief, there was no pain. When he talked about Gong Yimo, he was full of sweetness. When he talked about loving her, the joy in his eyes could almost infect her. Her son really loved Gong Yimo to the bone. She could only hate. She had sensed it a long time ago, but she did not stop Gong Che when he left the capital. Perhaps it was useless for her to stop him at that time. Some feelings were buried deep in the heart inadvertently, so it was often too late when she realized it. The Empress could not speak for a long time. In the end, she could not help but cry. No matter how much Gong Che liked Gong Yimo, she was still his sister. As the crown prince, her son was the role model of the world. One wrong step, and he would be doomed eternally. He would never be able to make a comeback. Seeing the Empress cry, Gong Che felt a little guilty. He was a filial person and could not bear to see the Empress cry because of him. However, he had no other choice. The entire Feng Qi palace could only hear the Empress sobbing in a low voice. Her grief was endless. The originally hot palace had an indescribable desolation. But she's your sister. Your feelings are not tolerated by the secular world. The Empress said this while crying. She really did not want to see her son walk on the road to death. She wanted to help him. Gong Che's face was filled with grief. He lowered his head to look at his hands as he muttered to himself, "But I can't control it anymore. Mother." Hearing this, the Empress closed her eyes and did not want to look at him. If now he knew that Gong Yimo was not the Emperor's biological daughter, it would only make things worse. So she could not say it. She could not let Gong Che know about this. Moreover, maybe her son was so affectionate because he had never been with other women. Maybe once he got married, those feelings would fade away, even if there was only a 1 in a million chance. Thinking of this, the Empress's will became firmer. She could not let things go on like this. She had to find a way to stop it, and the best way was to let Gong Che get married. Now, the only thing left was to find a way to convince him. Thinking of this, the Empress finally stopped crying. Instead, she calmly wiped away her tears bit by bit. Looking at her son who was still upset, a trace of grief flashed in her eyes. "Che, do you want to be with Gong Yimo?" Gong Che smiled bitterly when he heard this. How could he not want to? He wanted to even in his dreams. But he really didn't know how to fulfill this wish. As long as it could be fulfilled, he was willing to do anything. At this moment, the Empress's voice gradually lowered. "If you want to get her now, not only will you be maliciously slandered by the other princes, you might even be dragged down from your position in the Eastern Palace. You will also have to think of a way to shut the mouths of the wandering masses. Thus, it is impossible to be together with her now." Her words made Gong Che's eyes dim. How could he not know that once he did something, the prejudice of the world would consign Gong Yimo to eternal damnation? But the Empress's eyes flashed. In this world, there is only one person who can do whatever he wants. No one will dare to touch his reverse scale, and no one will question him. Her words were like a shot in the arm, making Gong Che's heart tremble. He looked at the Empress in astonishment. The Empress had already fallen into some kind of crazy mood. She suppressed her emotions and slowly said word by word, "If you become the Emperor, then you will be the one who has the most right to speak. When the time comes, you can directly change Gong Yimo's identity to enter the palace. The people won't understand, and the ministers, who would dare to say anything against the Emperor. Only when you become the Emperor, then you can have everything you want." Her words immediately pointed Gong Che in the right direction. It even made his heart burn with eagerness. The Empress's eyes flashed, and becoming the Emperor, is it such an easy thing? She smiled coldly. Let's not talk about Lucien Fei and Longue Fei's son. How many of the other princes are easy to deal with? Now you are not willing to marry and have no children. If one day Gong Yimo appears in front of people again, and your feelings are discovered, then what is waiting for you is eternal damnation. Mother. Gong Che knelt down and stubbornly raised his head. This son does not want to marry. This son does not want anyone except Gong Yimo. The Empress sat on the phoenix throne. That luxurious phoenix crown reflected a cold and elegant edge. She looked down at him and sneered. But now you don't want to marry, but slowly develop. How long will it take for you to become the Emperor? You can afford to wait, but will Gong Yimo wait for you? Her words made Gong Che speechless. Gong Yimo will not wait for him, because she doesn't know his feelings for her. Knowing this, the Empress timely said, And will Gong Yimo accept you? You now are just wishful thinking. If she does not accept you, are you willing to give her up like this? No, I will not give up. But without power, how can you not give up? You must know that behind her is Gong Dai, who is gradually rising. With his personality of treating his sister like his own life, if you don't have the right, how can you snatch her away? The Empress was indeed from the harem, and she knew her son very well. Every word and sentence seemed to hit his eardrums, making him uneasy and uneasy. Seeing that the effect has been achieved, she finally said the key sentence. Think about it carefully. Do you want to quickly marry and become the emperor step by step, or do you want to scheme bitterly and see Gong Yimo marry someone else? You choose. After that, she no longer looked at Gong Che and got up to leave. But her heart was very firm. My son, don't blame your mother for being ruthless. Mother is also thinking for you. If your feelings for Gong Yimo are stronger than gold, then sit on the emperor's throne for me to see. Gong Che's originally wavering heart inexplicably made a decision after the morning court the next day. Because Gong Dai was bestowed the title of prince in advance. He was not an idle prince, but a prince with real power. Not only did he have a fief, the emperor also gave him 50,000 soldiers. It was equivalent to entrusting half of the imperial city's safety to him. For a moment, there was no other glory. The emperor also gave him a prince's mansion. This made Gong Dai the happiest, because he finally had a home that he and Gong Yimo formed together. So after leaving the palace, Gong Dai eagerly took Gong Yimo to see their new house. That happy expression was a joy that the subordinate had never seen before. Gong Yimo also felt very happy, because she could decorate her room to her heart's content. She immediately chose a courtyard and shamelessly took it. The courtyard was very remote, but there was a hot spring. This was a pleasant surprise. Gong Dai looked at the hot spring surrounded by flowers and smiled slyly. In the future, when I'm tired, I will also come and soak in it. Royal sister can't refuse. Gong Yimo was patrolling the room. Hearing this, she did not turn her head and said, "It's okay, you can come tonight." Chapter 135. The fact that Gong Yimo agreed so readily made Gong Dai a little stunned. Once he thought of soaking in the hot spring with Gong Yimo, for some reason, he felt a little lightheaded, as if he had drunk too much. His royal sister was really sent by the heavens to torment him. Gong Dai's subordinates were very efficient. In the afternoon, Gong Yimo lay by the side of the hot spring in the courtyard and ate some snacks. As she ate, she counted on her fingers to calculate what she had to do next. In the end, she found that there was no rush, so she felt a little lazy and didn't want to move. At this time, Xian lifted the curtain and walked over. When Gong Yimo was demoted, Xian happened to be of age, so she was released. For some reason, she was found by Gong Dai and stayed to serve Gong Yimo. Princess, it's so late. His Highness must have a banquet tonight, so why don't we wait? She looked very small with a tender face. She was already 18 years old, but she still had an introverted and timid appearance. Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach and laid on the chair without moving. Her eyes were lifeless as she looked at the sky. Don't mind me. I can sleep on this chair until I die. Seeing her boneless appearance, Xian really couldn't imagine the princess's high-spirited appearance when she confronted the emperor alone more than a month ago. If those students were to know about this, in the princess's words, wouldn't that be disillusionment? Then do you still want to eat? She was just asking out of procedure. As expected, Gong Yimo waved her hand and said, "Go find me a wooden tray. And some wine. I want to soak in the hot spring." Xian couldn't do anything about it, so she could only do as she was told. By the time she was ready, Gong Yimo had already stripped naked and entered the hot spring. The dense steam filled the air, steaming her little face pink and tender. She lazily opened her eyes and lay by the side of the pool to watch Xian's movements, smiling fawningly. "Good Xian, why don't you come down and join us?" She looked at Xian's good figure with perverted eyes. Her fingers itched. If only she had a D cup, she would play with her own. That feeling, it was simply. This vulgar thought was rejected by Xian. She whispered, How is this something that servants like us can enjoy? My little princess, please spare this servant. If His Highness were to see this. Exionor shivered. She didn't dare to imagine it. After being rejected, Gong Yimo felt a little wronged. She pitifully held her wine glass and poured herself some wine. She placed the tray in the water. There were fruits and wine on the tray, and they moved along with the water. She sat on a naturally formed rock in the water. Everything below her chest was not in the water, so she did not feel cold at all. Exionor was waiting by the side, wearing thick clothes. At this moment, she suddenly raised her head and said happily, "Princess, it's snowing." She was a little excited. This is the first snow in the capital. Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked up, only to see countless white snowflakes drifting down from the pitch-black night sky. Under the illumination of the lights in the courtyard, there was a kind of silent beauty. Gong Yimo reached out to receive it, but the water vapor filled the air. Before the snow could land on her body, it melted. She sighed. This is the life that a person should live. She thought of the various things in her previous life. She experienced the picturesque landscape and also saw the rivers and mountains dyed with blood. She achieved the highest position, but also became a prisoner on death row. Her short life was too rushed. She didn't know what kind of state of mind other people would have if they were reborn. Would they pursue the highest position? Or would they want revenge and trample on all those who bullied her? That was too tiring. It was already hard to live. If she continued to torment herself, it would only make her life more difficult. A human life was so fragile. It would die just like that. What was the point of scheming all day long? She couldn't eat well or sleep well. It was better to do as she pleased. If there was a problem, it would be solved. If there was no problem, everything would be fine. This was life. Gong Yimo thought, and happily drank a mouthful of wine. For example, last year's pear blossom wine. There was only so much produced in a year. She was so lucky to be able to drink it. After drinking, she raised her head and ordered in a very domineering tone, "Exionor, why aren't you coming over to wipe my back?" Exionor smiled and responded. She quickly knelt by the pool and wiped her back. When she was with the princess, she had a feeling that she wanted to tell her everything in her heart. In the past, she didn't understand. Later on, when she grew up, she understood why. It was because the princess was broad-minded. Her vision had long been beyond the reach of ordinary people. Therefore, she didn't fuss over things and didn't guard against others. She did things according to her heart. It could be said that she had returned to the beginning. And the beginning of a person wasn't kindness. The princess was a kind person. Exionor was very glad that she was able to meet Gong Yimo. By her side, she seemed to have become a version of herself that she liked even more. Gong Yimo was completely unaware of Exionor's thoughts. She hugged the tray and ate and drank while enjoying Exionor's service. From time to time, she would turn her hand over to give Exionor some food. That extremely happy little appearance made her completely forget that she hadn't gone to report to Gong Che that she was safe. She had promised Shin Shiyi to treat her to a meal but hadn't done so. There were also some miscellaneous matters that had been thrown to the back of her mind. If she continued like this, wouldn't she degenerate? Gong Yimo thought in a daze. She picked up a piece of fruit and sent it behind her. Exionor, do you think the emperor is going to hold a banquet tomorrow to celebrate Gong Dai's success? Feeling that the person behind her directly took the fruit away with her mouth, Gong Yimo was a little surprised. However, she still continued to talk to herself. I really want to go and play. It's too boring to be alone. And at that time, there will definitely be a lot of women. It seems like it's time to find a woman for Gong Dai. Evil old society, but we still have to go with the flow. It seems like it's also very fun. Royal sister, do you really want me to marry a wife? A cold and unique voice suddenly sounded. Gong Yimo turned around abruptly and saw Gong Dai's somewhat aggrieved expression. It was as if she didn't want him anymore. Gong Yimo was caught red-handed. She secretly hated Exionor for not being helpful. She softly fawned. How could I not want you? Speaking of which, it's still dinner time. You've been busy attending banquets these past few days. Why did you come back so early?
Because
I missed you. Gong Dai scooped up a strand of her hair from the water and played with it. He smiled mysteriously and said, because those people are really too boring. At this moment, he was half lying on the edge of the water, his black robe and long hair falling into the water. The black color and his jade-like skin formed a soul-stirring contrast. His jade-like eyes were cold and clear as he looked over. His entire person was like a splash of ink painting, beautiful and full of charm. The dense water vapor evaporated. It made him even more beautiful than a mortal. Gong Yimo couldn't help but gulp. After a while, she finally recalled what he had just said. Boring is good. Boring is good. She drank some wine and was already captivated by this beauty. She didn't know what she was saying anymore. Gong Dai was secretly amused. He propped up his chin with one hand and opened up his chest. As he moved, the originally loose belt loosened even more. The collar was pulled open, revealing his exquisite collarbone. Chapter 136. At this moment, he had just grown up. He was not as young and tender as he was when he was young, nor was he as handsome as he was later. He was in between youth and maturity. He was slender and well-proportioned, slender but strong. It could be said that a little more would be too much and too little. That pair of black, jade-like eyes glanced sideways. They were cold and indifferent, but they could easily make people shudder. Gong Yimo suddenly understood why in her previous life. Gong Dai was notorious and his methods were so ruthless that it made people's hair stand on end. Even so, there were still so many women who wanted to enter his harem. It was enough just to look at this evildoer's appearance. If she could see his slightly cold eyes dyed with lust and go crazy for her, just thinking about it was a kind of satisfaction. Gong Yimo quickly shook her head. What nonsense was she thinking? Seeing that Gong Yimo liked his appearance, for the first time, Gong Dai felt that being good-looking was useful. Hence, he used more casual gestures to show off himself. The eagerness in his heart urged him to get closer and closer. Royal sister, let me continue to scrub your back. Gong Dai knew very well that Gong Yimo never minded such things. She didn't think that it was a big deal to expose her arms and legs in front of men. Especially when they were young, Gong Yimo often ate and lived with him to save trouble. Hence, she didn't reject his touch. That was why he had the chance to get some physical contact with her. She was clearly a child that she had raised single-handedly. She didn't know why, but when he used the towel to gently scrub her back unconsciously straightened and her body felt itchy and strange. She thought of something and couldn't help but shake her head violently. He was too much of a beast. Why would she have such thoughts? It was all Gong Dai's fault. He was too devilish. Looking like this, wasn't he seducing her to commit a crime? Hence, she grabbed Gong Dai's hand and said, "You must be tired. Come down and soak. You don't have to take care of me." Gong Dai's eyes lit up, and he immediately agreed. Seeing him like this, Gong Yimo felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance. But then she thought, since the pool was so big, what did it matter? Therefore, she just watched as Gong Dai undid his belt layer by layer. Finally, when he pulled, all his clothes fell off, leaving him with only a pair of underwear. Oh my God! Why did she feel goosebumps all over her body? What's with this tense feeling? Gong Dai looked at her nervous expression, and his heart leaped with joy. The fact that she was nervous proved that she also had feelings for him. He should be glad that he had a good body from years of martial arts practice. Gong Yimo wanted to close her eyes, but she felt that she shouldn't be so pretentious. When she opened her eyes, it seemed that she was too thick-skinned. However, Gong Dai's figure was really good. She might as well just look at it. No matter what, he was a child she raised. She had seen it countless times when he was young. Why couldn't she see it when he was older? She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but Gong Dai was very close to her after he entered the water. When Gong Yimo felt that it was inappropriate and wanted to walk away, Gong Dai slowly said, "How nice. I haven't talked with Royal Sister in a long time." However, he didn't think so in his heart. At this moment, he was only a meter away from Gong Yimo. When he thought about how she didn't wear clothes to bathe with him, that stimulating feeling spread from his spine to his scalp. It was to the extent that his eyes were dyed with suppressed desire. However, Gong Yimo couldn't possibly notice it in the steam. Gong Yimo wanted to forget that strange feeling of discomfort. so she started to seriously think of a topic to talk about. The Emperor is holding a banquet tomorrow. Can I go? Gong Dai used her cup to pour a cup of wine. He took a sip and said lightly, "Are you going to choose a consort for me?" Gong Yimo choked and retorted softly, "You can choose too." "Okay." Gong Dai looked at her with a smile but didn't say anything. Being stared at by him like this, Gong Yimo couldn't help but lower her head. She didn't know why, but when she lowered her head to look at his slender and fair fingers casually playing with the wine cup, that posture, and that well-defined skin, actually made her mouth dry up. She wanted to drink, but realized that her cup had long been snatched away by Gong Dai. When she thought of them drinking from the same cup, Gong Yimo couldn't help but pat her face. Did she drink too much? Why did she become so strange? Gong Dai silently inched closer. "Royal sister wants to choose a consort for me. Shouldn't you ask for my request?" Gong Yimo hurriedly nodded to hide her awkwardness. When he came closer, she immediately noticed. She moved back at a speed that he couldn't detect before saying, "And my younger brother naturally deserves the best. Tell me, what request do you have?" She refused to look at him, which made Gong Dai secretly happy. He moved closer again and whispered into Gong Yimo's ear, "Royal sister, I want the best woman in this world." There was a sweet smell of wine on his body. When he came closer, Gong Yimo immediately retreated instinctively. However, when she retreated, she realized that she was already leaning against the wall of the pool and had nowhere to retreat to. Gong Dai didn't give her any more pressure. Instead, he stared at her closely. His gaze seemed to have warmth, and wherever it landed, Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to find something to cover it up. She looked up and forced a smile. "Your request is too general. What's the best in this world?" Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. Even a casual movement from him was very pleasing to the eye. He smiled faintly and said, "As long as it's better than you, it's fine." Gong Yimo heard him and looked up at him. However, at a glance, his black hair was draped over his shoulders, and his exquisite face was like an aquatic demon. She didn't dare to look again after one glance. She swallowed her saliva. She didn't know if it was because she had been soaking in the pool for too long, but she actually felt that she couldn't breathe. "Royal sister, are you thirsty?" A warm wine cup was pressed against Gong Yimo's lips. Gong Dai was able to take a big step forward because of this. The distance between the two of them was less than half an arm. Gong Yimo didn't dare to think too deeply about the panic that made her hair stand on end. She directly drank the remaining half of the wine from his hand. The sweet wine spilled out a little because she drank it too quickly. The golden wine flowed down the corner of her mouth and her slender neck, finally disappearing into her collarbone. Her beautiful curves were fully displayed when she raised her head. Gong Dai's eyes darkened, and he almost couldn't control himself. At this moment, they were too close. It was too dangerous. Perhaps it was because it was too quiet when it was snowing, or because the water vapor was too hazy, or because the water temperature was too warm. They were in such a dangerous and ambiguous atmosphere. The two of them experienced the stimulation that made their bodies tremble and numb. For a moment, they were at a loss for words. Gong Dai didn't want to leave, but Gong Yimo didn't know how to leave. Her head was dizzy because of the wine, but her body was alert because of Gong Dai. "You haven't said if you're bringing me along?" Gong Yimo smiled and tried to change the topic. Little did she know that her cheeks were bright red and her eyes were moist. The beautiful curve of her neck and shoulders made people want to vomit blood. Gong Dai's Adam's apple moved. He felt as if there was a fire burning in his body. He felt very uncomfortable and painful, and his only salvation was right in front of him. It was so close, yet so far. Chapter 138. Gong Yimo felt her hair stand on end from his stare. She didn't know where she had exposed herself. As for the other party discovering her so quickly, she couldn't help but be even more vigilant. If other people also discovered who she was, then what was she going to do? Fortunately, her worries were unnecessary. The Emperor, who was so familiar with her, was only drinking cup after cup and didn't even look in her direction. Gong Che thought for a bit and said a few words to the people behind him. The two people who were originally following him retreated and went somewhere unknown. Gong Dai had too many people toasting him. He used the excuse that he was too young and couldn't hold his liquor to reject them all. When the emperor saw this, he laughed loudly. Qian, you can reject the wine here, but when we go to the women's banquet, I'm afraid you can't. As he said this, he stood up shakily and walked a few steps towards Gong Dai. Everyone else, continue to eat and drink. The two of us will go to the women's banquet alone to take a look. He seemed to be a bit drunk and laughed. They must be discussing your marriage. Let's also go and see if there are any good people. Gong Dai was dragged away by the emperor with half of his shoulder. He was extremely anxious. He definitely didn't want to leave Gong Yimo here, but if he took her away, the emperor only brought Changxi alone. Changxi's martial arts were strong. If he found out, Gong Yimo would be in even more danger. For the 100th time, he was annoyed that his beauty had ruined things last night. He silently glanced at Gong Yimo and then left with the emperor. Once Gong Dai left, Gong Che could no longer control himself. He held a cup of wine and walked towards the official closest to Gong Yimo. However, he wasn't careful and directly bumped into him, drenching himself in wine. When the official saw this, he quickly said, "The crown prince probably can't hold his liquor, so don't drink anymore." Why don't you have anyone serving you? Who was that? Yes, it's you. Quickly bring the crown prince back to the palace to rest. Gong Yimo pointed at the tip of her nose in astonishment. But thinking that she had originally come to report her safety to Gong Che, she obediently agreed. She only hoped that when Gong Dai returned, he wouldn't be anxious because he couldn't find her. The moment her hand touched Gong Che's, it was grabbed tightly by his fiery hands. His entire body was leaning on Gong Yimo. His chest started to beat, giving Gong Che an illusion. When she wasn't around, his heart didn't seem to move, feel sad, or feel happy. But when she was near, his entire body seemed to come alive, as if a soul had been injected into him. Although Gong Yimo felt that it was strange, she still helped him out. They gradually left the people's line of sight, and unknowingly, they actually arrived at the lotus pond where they used to go boating together. Thinking back to that embarrassing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, Gong Yimo felt a little embarrassed, but Gong Che missed it very much and was also very glad. He was glad that he didn't hurt Gong Yimo that time, so she could still stand by his side and accompany him. It was very quiet here, because everyone had gone over to help. However, they were still afraid that someone would secretly monitor them, so Gong Che slightly waved his hand. Immediately, two shadows separated and blocked the two directions. Gong Che was still worried. He didn't want Gong Yimo to be threatened, so he ordered someone to bring over a small boat, saying that he wanted to take advantage of the alcohol to go boating. Gong Yimo only thought that Gong Che had something to say to her, so she lowered her head obediently and let him arrange it. She didn't know how anxious Gong Che was. His palms were wet with sweat, but he controlled his eyes and didn't glance at the person beside him. The boat arrived very quickly. Gong Yimo didn't forget that she was a waiter, so she quickly jumped onto the boat first and then helped Gong Che onto the boat. During this time, the two of them looked at each other for the first time. Gong Yimo only glanced at him once, then quickly looked away as if she was scalded. She finally felt that it was a little strange. Gong Che's gaze was too hot, as if it could melt people. She exerted strength in her legs, and the boat sailed into the lake. At this time, the flowers and leaves in the lake had already withered, and the moonlight shone down, making it seem a little bleak. This boat had a cabin. Gong Yimo helped Gong Dai into the cabin to sit down. Just as she was about to get up, Gong Che forcefully pulled her into his arms. The cabin was very dark, and there was only a single lamp. It was also very small, making Gong Yimo inexplicably panic. Crown Prince Gidge? Don't speak. Gong Che's slightly trembling voice sounded beside Gong Yimo's ear. He hugged her very tightly and didn't want to hear any words of resistance from Gong Yimo. You're still alive. That's great. He hugged Gong Yimo tightly, as if he wanted to confirm if this person really existed. Gong Yimo's heart was slightly warmed. She felt that all her efforts had not been in vain. Gong Che really cared about her a lot. Gong Yimo patted his shoulder to make him relax. Crown Prince Gidge, aren't I back now? How could anything happen to me? I'm someone who cherishes my life a lot. But this wasn't the main point. The main point was that Gong Che missed her a lot. So many days and nights, he had endured it bitterly. He wanted to hug this little vixen in his arms to sleep, to rub their heads together, and wake up together in the morning. He missed her so much that his heart ached. Tell her everything. He cared about her not because of some sibling relationship, but because he loved her. She loved him so deeply that she had to endure the pain of yearning for him at every moment. Gong Che's hurried breathing was accompanied by the fragrance of the wine. Gong Yimo felt a little ticklish and couldn't help but shrink her neck. But the moment she moved, Gong Che leaned closer. She seemed to be able to feel Gong Dai's thin lips gently kissing the skin below her ear, and that feeling made her hair stand on end. Crown Prince Gidge. She pushed Gong Che away. Gong Che's eyes were hurt for a moment, but Gong Yimo didn't notice and forced herself to calm down. The heat in the small cabin made people sweat. Gong Yimo took a deep breath and forced a smile. Crown Prince Gidge, I'm fine. That's right. Are your injuries all healed? The emptiness in his arms made Gong Che feel disappointed. He didn't want to discuss these things with Gong Yimo. He looked at Gong Yimo and swallowed his words several times. Why didn't you come to see me earlier? Why did you go to Shizhou? Is Gong Dai really that important to you? In your heart. Is he more important than me? Why are you resisting my approach? But he couldn't ask any of these questions, and he couldn't say anything. The relationship between blood relatives was like an insurmountable gap that separated all possibilities between him and her. He suddenly remembered what the Empress had said. Yes, he couldn't wait any longer. He had to quickly become stronger, so strong that he could directly dominate her. So Gong Che's breathing gradually calmed down, but his eyes were still firmly locked onto Gong Yimo. Are you willing to go to Huai River with me? Chapter 139. His words stunned Gong Yimo. The more Gong Che thought about it, the more he felt that it was a good idea. If Gong Yimo went with him, not only would they be able to start this prosperous era together, he would also have enough time to move Gong Yimo and make her accept him and wait for him. As long as he became the emperor, he would definitely make Gong Yimo his empress. As long as she went with him, he would have a lot of time to do this. Gong Yimo was indeed a little moved because her illegal immigration plan was still under construction. It would be good for her to go and supervise it. But she also thought of Gong Dai. Gong Dai was now conferred the title of Prince Qi and was also appointed as the Imperial Guard of the Right. He had 50,000 soldiers and horses under him, so he definitely could not leave. Could it be that she would have to leave Gong Dai to do other things? Gong Che's eyes flashed with a bewitching light as he slowly said in a bewitching manner, "If you go with me, not only can you start your logistics plan, you can also open a shop. It's better than you staying in the capital with your hands and feet tied, isn't it?" He was right. Gong Yimo was now a dead person in the capital. She definitely could not show her face. Rather than staying here, it would be better to change her appearance and go out to do something big. Just as Gong Yimo opened her mouth to say something, a cold voice sounded. "She will not go with you." The hull of the ship gently shook, and the curtains of the cabin were torn open by internal force. Gong Dai stood at the bow of the ship with a cold face. The wind tore his robe, and his eyes were filled with killing intent as they locked onto Gong Che. That naked killing intent made Gong Yimo stand up and slightly block Gong Che. But Gong Che stood up and walked past Gong Yimo to the deck to face Gong Dai. Why not? Under the moonlight, Gong Che was standing lower, so he raised his head slightly. For the first time, his smiling face was so cold. He straightened his back and looked straight at Gong Dai. If taking a step back meant giving up Gong Yimo, then even if his body was smashed into pieces, he would not back down. Gong Ju stood on the prow of the ship, looking down at Gong Che with a condescending gaze. His eyes were filled with mockery. How could a weak man like Gong Che compete with him for the royal sister? Royal sister is mine. She will only go with me. When Gong Dai said this, he couldn't help but look at Gong Yimo's expression. How he wished to see Gong Yimo recognize him, and then stand out to make Gong Che give up. Gong Yimo was captivated by his sorrowful expression. She suddenly felt sorry for him. Was she going to leave him again after being separated from him for only a year and a half? Sensing the change in Gong Yimo's emotions, Gong Che narrowed his eyes. Her hands and feet are tied in the capital. Only when she leaves here can she spread her wings and soar. You want Immerse to risk being discovered and stay here with you for your own selfish reasons? That's too much. Gong Dai paused. He pursed his thin lips and said firmly, I can protect her. Protect her? Gong Che sneered. Immerse is not a golden bird in a cage. She is more outstanding than any man in this world. She once said that once the canal was built, she would think of a way to monopolize the transportation and logistics. She even said that she wanted to steal the tributaries and trade with Lu Yi. She wanted to open her shops all over the country and even overseas. And you want to bind such a person to your side? Just for your own selfish reasons? Every word of his words hit Gong Ju's sore spot. Gong Ju's face turned pale, and he finally revealed a wry smile. He knew that Gong Yimo liked freedom. How could he not know how outstanding she was? But it was precisely because she was too outstanding that he couldn't let her go. Because once he let her go, more and more people would realize how good she was and come to snatch her away. Now, Royal Sister had never been moved by anyone. But once she met more people, what if she fell in love with someone else? Fall in love with someone else? Just the thought of it made his murderous aura explode. His eyes suddenly turned bloodshot, but the corners of his mouth turned up slightly. But what should I do? Royal Sister said before that everything she did was for me. Since she built it for me, why can't she give it up for me? His words were like a ruthless knife that pierced Gong Che's heart and made it bleed. He really didn't think that Gong Yimo would go to this extent for Gong Dai. He looked at Gong Yimo. His eyes were full of unwillingness and accusation. Wasn't it just the 3 years in the cold palace? Why couldn't he compare? Why couldn't he compare? Enough. Gong Yimo suddenly opened her mouth. She looked at Gong Che and Gong Dai tiredly and sighed. Tell me, as the elder brother and younger brother that I value the most, why are you arguing here? She scratched her hair in confusion and looked at them in puzzlement. Shouldn't you get along with each other? Why are you fighting against each other? Gong Yimo couldn't figure it out. It wasn't a big deal whether she left or not. Why did it seem like they were fighting over her? She didn't know what to do. Her indifferent words shocked Gong Che and Gong Dai. They looked at each other and saw the same emotions in each other's eyes. They were enduring and hurting their spirits. Yes, in Gong Yimo's heart, they were her most important family. They were only family. She would have thoughts of spending the rest of her life with many people, but they were the only ones she would never consider. And now, unless they wanted to break the ice, they could only pretend that nothing happened and get along with each other. Ha! Get along with each other? The arrogance of the sword on the boat was too obvious. Gong Yimo seemed to have something in her heart. She looked at them with a complicated expression. The wind from the lake made her heart cold and her back cold. She asked hesitantly, tentatively, and cautiously, You haven't answered me. Why are you fighting against each other? Her sharp eyes swept across the uneasiness on Gong Che's face and the coldness on Gong Dai's face. A strange thought suddenly appeared in her mind. This world, had it gone crazy? Why would she have such a thought? Gong Che's eyes flashed. In the end, he reached out and touched Gong Yimo's hair. Under the moonlight, his expression softened again and he sighed helplessly. You probably don't know. Gong Dai is a ruthless person. I'm just afraid of being influenced by him. Gong Dai stared at his hand and smiled coldly. However, he still played along with his words. Recently, you took advantage of the Emperor's guilt and used his hands to kill countless people. What right do you have to talk about me? Their words finally dispelled Gong Yimo's strange thoughts. Perhaps they didn't like the way the other party did things and were worried about her. However, she still lowered her head and said softly, Then can't you get along with each other? In her previous life, they had a good working relationship. Gong Dai looked at Gong Che and narrowed his eyes. Gong Che also smiled coldly. Although the two of them were only 2 meters apart, it was as if one was in purgatory and the other was on a cliff. This matter, we will handle it. Chapter 140. Since he said so, Gong Yimo only nodded and didn't say anything else. With Gong Dai messing things up, Gong Che definitely didn't have a chance to persuade her anymore. He could only watch as Gong Yimo and Gong Dai left the palace. On the way, Gong Dai didn't say a word. He was obviously angry. Gong Yimo also felt awkward. She wasn't stupid, she just didn't want to use her brain. However, she was shocked by Gong Che and Gong Dai's recent abnormalities. Their concern for her. Was it because of their relationship with her? If it was, wouldn't it be too much? That kind of passion made Gong Yimo a little afraid and resistant. Gong Dai was still angry at first, but when he saw Gong Yimo looking as if she was thinking about something, his heart trembled. He immediately threw the unhappiness from before to the back of his mind. He quickly thought, did Gong Che say something to her before he arrived? Actually, when it came to expressing feelings, Gong Dai really didn't have any experience. On one hand, he wanted to abandon his identity as her brother, but on the other hand, he wanted to use this identity to get closer to her. If Gong Yimo really sensed his feelings now, he wouldn't know what to do. He was unbelievably ruthless to outsiders, but in reality, Gong Dai was still a virgin, royal sister. He opened his mouth, but remembered that he was angry. He was a little annoyed and arrogant, so he tilted his head and didn't look at her. Are you really going to leave with Gong Che? His voice was clear and low, but there was an indescribable grievance in it. Gong Yimo came back to her senses and looked at him, feeling a little guilty. In front of her, he was clearly a 13-year-old boy. What was she thinking? Gong Yimo held his hand and laughed softly. Don't worry, no matter what, I'll always be on your side. After all, you're the one who grew up with me. As she spoke, she leaned on Gong Dai's shoulder tiredly. Gong Dai was getting bigger and bigger, so his shoulders were becoming more solid, and he could be relied on. Her closeness made all the unhappiness in Gong Dai's heart disappear. Actually, he was often unsatisfied with Gong Yimo, but as long as she took the initiative, he would be very, very satisfied. This was the first time Gong Che wanted to kill someone. He looked at his powerless hands and felt a deep sense of self-loathing. He had never killed anyone before. Even if he did kill someone, he would let someone else do it. Therefore, his hands were clean. At least, he had never been directly stained with blood. But now, he wished that he could have outstanding martial arts skills. This way, he could also protect Gong Yimo. He could too. At the thought of Gong Yimo and Gong Dai living together, he was so jealous that he wanted to go crazy. They were clearly family. One was the elder brother, and the other was the younger brother. Why was she so biased that she could stay by the younger brother's side but not by his? His appearance frightened everyone. Someone went to report to the Empress. When the Empress heard it, she sighed deeply. We can't wait any longer. Shui Xian, pass down my decree. 3 days later, there will be a banquet in the palace. Invite the families on the list to the banquet. There must be no delays. The water deity hurriedly took a scroll, and on it were densely packed small words. After thinking for a while, the Empress said, since it's obvious that it's a consort selection, it's not good to be biased. Call the other princes who are of suitable age over. Yes, Your Highness. After Shui Xian left, the Empress looked at her back with an unreadable expression until she disappeared. She secretly made up her mind. Chair, don't blame me. Everything Imperial Mother has done is for your sake. After returning home, Gong Yimo went straight to sleep. She didn't like to think. Once she thought, she felt tired and only wanted to sleep. Gong Dai sighed. He stroked her hair and covered her with the blanket. Seeing her fall asleep with her brows slightly knitted, he felt his heart ache for no reason. He knew in his heart that he couldn't lock her up, but he couldn't let go. The consequences he couldn't bear. After he left with a long sigh, Gong Yimo opened her eyes. Her gaze was a little confused. If she didn't notice it, it was fine. Once she noticed it, she felt that Gong Dai's every action was unusual. Was it really just a sibling relationship? 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these few days, other than working, Gong Dai spent most of his time with Gong Yimo. He acutely felt Gong Yimo's uneasiness. So these few days, he played the role of a younger brother with all his heart. He obediently allowed Gong Yimo to manipulate him, as if they had returned to the past. So the doubts in Gong Yimo's heart gradually disappeared. Gong Dai was going to attend the Empress banquet. Gong Yimo made faces at him as she combed his hair. This is obviously a matchmaking banquet. When the time comes, you have to tell me which family's girl you like. Gong Dai didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he still responded gently. His devilish eyes narrowed slightly as he spoke intentionally or unintentionally. The Crown Prince is obviously the main character of this banquet. I'm just going to go through the motions. After he finished speaking, he saw that Gong Yimo's expression didn't change at all. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He then said, "Royal sister, who do you want the Crown Prince to marry?" This question stumped Gong Yimo. She didn't know much about the womenfolk in the capital. Anyway, it didn't matter who it was, as long as it wasn't Su Miaolon. She didn't want to take revenge on her, but to let Su Miaolon marry Gong Che? This was the only thing she wouldn't agree to. Seeing that she was really thinking about it, Gong Dai smiled from the bottom of his heart. Then he obediently let Gong Yimo tie up his hair. Looking at the two of them in the mirror, one standing and one sitting, his expression was full of sweetness. If only it could always be like this, it would be great just the two of them. But on the other side, Gong Che was having a hard time. There was no heating in Feng Chi Palace, so it was very cold from the inside out. "Mother, I won't go." Gong Che stood stubbornly in front of the Empress. His expression was cold, as if he was talking about something that didn't belong to him. Hearing this, the Empress put down her cup. Today was a rare big day, so she was dressed very luxuriously. Her majesty as the Empress was fully displayed, making her look a little unreasonable. At this time, after hearing Gong Che's words, she wasn't angry. Instead, she said calmly, "This matter is approved by His Majesty. Whether you agree or not, you have to go." Hearing this, Gong Che looked at her coldly. His eyes didn't look like he was looking at his mother, but as if he was looking at an enemy. The Empress's move of acting first and reporting later caught him off guard. The Empress was scared by his gaze, but she forced herself to be calm and snorted, "What, you don't want Gong Yimo?" Her words poked at Gong Che's sore spot, making Gong Che suddenly calm down, but he couldn't say anything. As expected, only Gong Yimo could suppress him now. The Empress sat on the phoenix seat, looked out of the hall, and sighed faintly. "Mother admits that you've grown up and have the ability. Once the matter of building the canal is completed, you'll have great achievements. But have you thought about it? How long will it take to build the canal? During this time, how many unforeseen events will happen? If no one in the capital protects your position, what happened last time will still happen." Chapter 141. After that, she looked at Gong Che's pained expression and sighed. The Liu family is useless. Among the descendants, the best one is a Jinsher. Father's death is too much of a blow to the Liu family. Even if the canal can bring the Liu family a lot of money, it will be in the future. As for Gong Yimo, will she wait for you? The analysis was very thorough, but it made Gong Che feel a chill in his bones. His body swayed and he almost couldn't stand. Why did it have to be like this? Why were these people and these things all obstructing him? Obviously, he only wanted Gong Yimo. He closed his eyes and his sorrowful expression made the Empress' heart ache. But she couldn't be soft-hearted. So she took a sip of tea and whispered with an inexplicable expression, "Gong Yimo, she's almost 14, right?" "Mother." Gong Dai clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly raised his head and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked very frightening. "Must it be now? Choosing a concubine in front of Immerse? I can't do it. I really can't do it." Every word seemed to be squeezed out from the gap between his teeth. His words made the Empress think deeply. Suddenly, she realized something and covered her mouth to laugh. "My silly son. Gong Yimo, she still doesn't know about your feelings, right?" Gong Che didn't say anything. How could he dare to let her know? "And you also know that your feelings are against the world. So, why don't you go and ask her?" Gong Che looked at her helplessly. "Ask her what?" The Empress smiled. "Silly child. Mother is naturally doing it for your own good. You go and ask Gong Yimo now. Tell her everything. If she is also interested in you, won't it be a happy ending? All the problems will be solved." The Empress's words made Gong Che's heart tremble. But his reason told him that Gong Yimo would not agree. Seeing Gong Che's pale and complicated expression, the Empress was an experienced person after all, so she added another dose of ruthless medicine. Even if she is not interested in you now, you should at least let her know your feelings. As long as she doesn't directly reject you, then you still have a chance, right? You can tell her your current difficulties and let her wait for you. If she is completely not interested in you, there's no point in you persisting like this, right? Her words made Gong Che's heart was restless. God knows, he had wanted to do this for a long time, but he didn't dare to do so, because he felt that Gong Yimo would definitely not accept him. But what if? What if? What if Immerse has a trace of good feelings for him? This kind of thought of this idea. He felt fear, panic, anticipation, and sweetness. He thought that if Gong Yimo also had the heart, no, as long as she didn't directly refuse him, then he could wait. Reject the marriage alliance and continue to wait. Yes, he should have done this long ago. The Empress said at the right time, Immerse is now in Qi Manor, right? And Gong Dai, he should be on his way. Now, you might be able to see Gong Yimo. Gong Che couldn't hold it in any longer. He bid farewell to the Empress and hurried towards Qi Manor. Seeing him leave in such a hurry, the Empress held her heart and sighed. Her son had already turned into a demon. He loved someone to the point that he was like a demon, but it didn't matter. She would pull him back bit by bit, even if she had to give up everything. When he left, Gong Dai felt uneasy. He hesitated for a moment. After thinking about it, bringing Gong Yimo into the palace would make him even more uneasy. So he could only order people to watch over them and not let anyone in. Finally, he thought for a moment and then added another sentence. Not even the princess. After giving his orders, he leapt onto his horse and glanced at Qi Manor. His eyes gradually turned from cold to satisfied. He didn't want much. As long as he could hide Gong Yimo by his side, it would be enough. After he left, Gong Che walked out from the shadows after a long time. He glanced at the vermilion gate with a deep fervor in his eyes. Gong Dai couldn't keep Immerse locked up. This was something he was very clear about. So he took out something from his sleeve. It was something that looked like a firework. If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely remember it. At that time, while she was concocting the poison, she had also casually made some small things. This sound signal flare was one of the finished products. Gong Yimo was originally reading in the courtyard when she suddenly heard a strange sound. She jerked her head up and indeed saw the red firework exploding in the sky during the day. This was the signal flare that she had given to Gong Che. Although she now had a strange feeling towards Gong Che, when the signal flare went off, she couldn't help but go take a look. She hoped that he hadn't encountered some trouble. Although it wasn't likely that he was in the Imperial City, what was the reason for him to set off a signal flare near Qi Manor? With this thought, she hurriedly went out. She didn't expect to be stopped at the main entrance. Gong Yimo even knew this person. His name was Lo Chi, and he was Gong Dai's #1 guard. Gong Yimo was somewhat puzzled but still asked politely, I'm wearing a scarf and going out for a stroll. Why are you stopping me? Lo Chi couldn't see Gong Yimo's face and could only reply militarily. His Highness has ordered. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Hearing that it was Gong Dai's order, Gong Yimo smiled and waved her hand carelessly. Since it's Gong Dai's order, don't worry. I'm fine. But at this moment, Lo Chi looked up at Gong Yimo and said, including the princess. His words caused Gong Yimo's smile to freeze on her face. It was a little strange, but because she was wearing a scarf, they couldn't see it. Are you guys going to put me under house arrest? It can't be. Gong Dai wouldn't do that. Are you guys mistaken? Lo Chi lowered his head and said, That's right. Including the princess, no one is allowed to enter or leave this place. His words made Gong Yimo feel strange. Why would Gong Dai give such an order? How could this be? But she didn't have time to argue with them. She muttered, I must go out today. Let's see what you can do to me. Humph. With that, she strode forward. At this moment, 2 swords crossed in front of her, and Lo Chi's cold voice was still beside her. Princess, don't make things difficult for us. This time, Gong Yimo was really angry. How could Gong Dai give the order to lock her up? Even if she was in danger of being discovered if she went out now, it shouldn't be to this extent, right? Don't forget, she was pretty good at fighting. Her face turned cold. I don't believe that you guys would dare to stop me from entering my brother's residence. With that, she didn't even look at the swords and walked straight ahead. Those people didn't dare to stop her and kept retreating. Lo Chi couldn't do anything and could only helplessly watch Gong Yimo leave. Little Chi, quickly go into the palace and report to His Highness. Little Chi was anxious, Brother Luo. Why did you let the princess go? Your martial arts are so good. You might not be a match for the princess. If we don't stop her, how are we going to explain to His Highness when he comes back? Looking at Little Chi's silly look, Lo Chi sighed with a straight face and looked in the direction Gong Yimo left. You just have to remember that if we hurt the princess, His Highness won't let us off. Chapter 142. When Gong Yimo came out, she looked back and muttered in her heart what was going on. Forget it. I'll wait for Gong Dai to come back at night and ask him. She turned her head to look at the street. It was a busy street. Just when she didn't know where to find Gong Che, a little boy ran over. Elder sister, there's a big brother waiting for you at Wanxiang residence. Gong Yimo smiled and rubbed his head. She gave him some money and went to Wanxiang residence. On the way, she was puzzled. It seems that Gong Che should be fine. It's just that the matchmaking banquet in the afternoon was specially arranged for him. Why did he run out now? With a stomach full of doubts, she went in and was led to a room on the top floor. When she walked in, Gong Che seemed to have been waiting for a long time. Crown Prince Gij. Gong Yimo put aside her scarf and walked towards the window. Gong Che looked back at the right time. When he saw Gong Yimo, his eyes lit up. Imo-er, why are you looking for me in such a hurry? Is there something urgent? Gong Yimo curiously went over to take a look. Below was the street, and there were many people walking around. There was nothing to see. Gong Che did not answer her question. Instead, he pointed to a couple who were selling snacks downstairs. Have you eaten Liu Shan's cloud cake? This couple has been here for more than 20 years. Gong Yimo felt that it was very strange. She looked at Gong Che and found that he had dressed up meticulously today. The moon white robe and silver hairpin set off his handsome face. When he smiled, the room was filled with elegance. He was really like a young master. Gong Yimo shook her head. Never. Gong Dai usually did not allow her to eat the food from the vendors. He was very strict. Gong Che smiled and said, they were a young couple. For more than 20 years, they only had each other. Their relationship is very good. It's a beautiful story in the capital. Seeing Gong Yimo's confusion, he lowered his voice and said lightly, they are also cousins. This sentence made Gong Yimo's heart skip a beat. Gong Che didn't give her time to react. He pulled her to sit down on the couch. This room was too strange. Other than the couch and the floor mats, there wasn't even a chair. Gong Yimo was not used to sitting so close to him. She forced a smile. Brother Crown Prince, you haven't told me why you're looking for me. Could it be that they were discussing someone else's marriage? Isn't it normal to call each other cousins? Gong Che looked at her and smiled faintly. That's right. It's normal to have cousins, but what about half-sisters? Brother Crown Prince. Gong Yimo's eyes widened. She suddenly looked at him timidly. Crown Prince Gij, don't forget. There's still a banquet in the afternoon. You should return to the palace. Gong Che chuckled softly. What's so funny about that? Gong Yimo looked at him warily. However, she saw him smile more and more bitterly. That handsome face slowly paled and dimmed. In the end, he looked at her with deep sorrow. But I don't want anyone else. I just have to fall in love with my half-sister. What should I do? Gong Che thought that it would be difficult to say this, but after he said it, he felt relaxed. He pulled Gong Yimo's hand and moved closer to her. It seemed that the closer he was to her, the more comfortable his body would feel. It had been 18 years. He had never wanted someone so badly. Gong Yimo thought that she had heard wrongly. Her mouth opened and closed in disbelief. Brother Crown Prince, do you know what you're saying? Gong Che liked her. Stop joking. Gong Yimo's body trembled just thinking about it. In this life, she really treated Gong Dai as her brother. Wasn't he always a good brother? Just as she was in a daze, Gong Che could no longer restrain himself. He leaned forward and suddenly pressed her down on the bed. His breaths became hot in an instant. He had wanted to do this for a long time, pressing on Gong Yimo's body, looking at her under his body, so close. This kind of pleasure almost drove him crazy. All of a sudden, he forgot how to express his feelings to her. His fingers caressed her face that was so close to his. He just wanted to kiss her, possess her. The sudden change stunned Gong Yimo, especially when she saw Gong Che's eyes turn red. This was a sign that he had fallen in love. He actually really liked her. Immerse. These two words seemed to have been placed on the tip of Gong Che's tongue, rolling over it countless times before he said them. That lingering feeling was sweeter than honey, yet it also had a heat that could melt everything. He carefully and cautiously hugged Gong Yimo. He was pleasantly surprised and flustered. Immerse, I can't believe I can hug you like this. Looking at her blushing face and her watery eyes looking at him, Gong Che felt restless. In 18 years, this was the first time he felt that restraining himself was such an uncomfortable thing. Those bright red lips, as long as he lowered his head, he could taste them, but he didn't dare. He was afraid that it would trigger Gong Yimo's reaction. He still had so many words of love to say to her. Gong Yimo regained her senses and wanted to get up, but she was hugged tightly by Gong Che. Just for a while. I won't do anything to you. I just want to hug you for a while. He was too uncomfortable. After expressing his feelings, he seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't control his surging emotions at all. He could only hug her and stick to her to ease it a little. Pleading in such a low voice was really hard to reject. Gong Yimo tried her best to calm her heartbeat. She forced herself to be calm and said, "Brother Crown Prince, don't joke around, you're my brother." Gong Che breathed in the fragrance of her hair and sighed. That low and slightly hoarse voice rubbed Gong Yimo's ears, making her feel numb and itchy. Her whole body was tense and trembling, but her mind was blank. She couldn't figure out what was going on. Gong Che purposely teased her sensitive spot. "Why can we be cousins, but not half-sisters? Immerse, I've been thirsty for you for a long time. I've been thirsty for you for a long time. A long, long time." Gong Yimo asked coldly. She felt his cautious and restrained passion and thought of her previous life. She had fought for him for 10 years, and when she returned, he was indifferent to her. She suppressed her emotions and asked coldly, "When did it start?" Hearing her say that instead of pushing him away immediately, Gong Che held back his joy and let go of her. He propped himself up and placed his hands on both sides of her body. His pair of beautiful eyes couldn't help but look at her expression, looking at her with infatuation. Those crimson eyes were as gentle as water, as if they were going to devour her. "It's been too long. I've loved you for too long. So long that I don't even dare to remember. So many nights of longing for you. How did I spend them?" As he said that, he carefully pulled Gong Yimo's hand and placed it on his heart. He spoke gently and attentively. "I can't help but love you. When I first saw you, I felt that all the women in this world paled in comparison to you. You're so special." Chapter 143. Gong Yimo took a deep breath and looked up at him. The first time they met was in the cold palace, when she killed someone in front of everyone. She still remembered that she saw the young him behind the emperor, and she sneered in her heart. In her previous life, Gong Che hated her the most when she killed people and her hands were covered in blood. He fell in love with the seemingly innocent and kind Su Miaolon, but in this life, he probably couldn't accept her bloodthirsty appearance. She didn't expect that, now that he said it, the bloodthirsty cruelty from back then had become different. She really couldn't figure it out. Gong Che didn't notice the change in her mood at all. His heart was immersed in the happiness of being able to tell her everything. He was like a young and naive boy, and he longed for a little response from his sweetheart. So when he saw that Gong Yimo didn't answer, he felt a little uneasy, and he held her hand a little tighter. His large palm was slightly wet, but he pressed Gong Yimo's small hand tightly against his chest. Gong Yimo could feel that his heartbeat was very slow, but it was especially strong. It seemed to be hitting her palm again and again. Later on, we went boating at the lotus pond. He blinked, as if embarrassed, and said in a low voice, "You did those things to me. You kissed me. You kissed me many times. Do you still remember?" That incident at the lotus pond was just to save him, but she didn't expect him to misunderstand. Gong Yimo opened her mouth to explain, but he let go of her hand, and his fingertips touched her lips. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "It's this little red that makes me toss and turn, and I yearn for it day and night. I still remember the feeling of it." His words made Gong Yimo's scalp tingle, and she saw his dazed expression turn miserable. "I restrained myself. I really restrained myself. I know. I shouldn't have done that to you." His lips trembled, and his finger moved up from her lips, carefully caressing her brows. Seeing that she didn't avoid him, that sweet happiness almost drowned him. He sighed in a dreamy tone. "When I went to Star City, I originally wanted to restrain my feelings for you. I didn't want to think about you, and I didn't want to see you. But you were by my side. You were so stubborn and lively that I couldn't forget you. Have you forgotten? You said that I neglected you in the Yangtze River." He couldn't restrain himself any longer. He leaned over and gently kissed Gong Yimo's forehead. The lingering feeling and satisfaction made him sigh. "You said that I neglected you. How could I do that?" From that moment on, I realized that I could no longer let go of you. No longer. Immerse, you forced me to do this. You were so nice to me, but you were so despicable that you took all my attention. I can't stop loving you. You forced me to do this. You're still willing to die for me." Gong Che raised his head and looked at her affectionately. "When I woke up and realized that you weren't by my side, at that moment, I died too. It's great that you appeared again. You were so nice to me. In your heart, do you also have a trace of romantic feelings for me? A younger sister can't possibly do so much for an older brother. In your heart, do you also have feelings for me?" He stared at Gong Yimo anxiously and anxiously. The redness in his eyes became more and more intense. It was bewitching and beautiful. It made his originally gentle face look even more charming. He was so close to Gong Yimo, greedily absorbing the heat from Gong Yimo's body. He was so expectant that he didn't want to miss any expression on Gong Yimo's face. Gong Yimo seemed to have woken up from a dream. She liked Gong Che? No. Her feelings for him had already come to an end in her previous life. In this life, she wouldn't like anyone anymore. Gong Yimo thought of this and prepared to leave. Seeing that she wanted to leave, how could Gong Che let her? However, he wasn't Gong Yimo's opponent. Gong Yimo turned around and pressed Gong Che under her body. Looking at her pressing on top of him, Gong Che felt a strange sense of satisfaction in his heart. The intimate physical contact made him sigh. It would be great if time stopped. It would stop at this moment. He prayed from the bottom of his heart. Seeing him looking at her with such infatuation, she didn't hide her feelings anymore. That gaze was lingering and eager. It contained a heat that could burn people. Gong Yimo's heart ached. She couldn't bear to hurt him too much and only said in a low voice, "In this life, I won't be with anyone and I won't like anyone. So, give up." Her low voice was like a basin of ice water. It made Gong Che's face pale little by little. In the end, even his lips turned pale. Gong Yimo thought for a while and said, "Crown Prince Gij, since you and I are already brother and sister, then we will be brother and sister in this life. As for the rest, let go." Gong Dai couldn't believe it. Impossible. He didn't believe that Gong Yimo would reject him so directly. She must have had feelings for him. She must have suppressed it because of their blood relationship. It must be. Immerse. His black hair scattered on the bed made his face look even paler. He lifted his upper body and said in a pleading voice, "You're lying to me, aren't you? You're so different from the rest. Would you care about this little bit of blood relationship?" Seeing that Gong Yimo didn't answer, he seemed to have grasped the opportunity. He reached out and grabbed Gong Yimo tightly. His eyes were filled with panic. "I'm going back to the palace later. Imperial Mother is forcing me to get married. I don't want to, as long as you say it. I won't get married. I will always wait for you." Wait until I become the emperor, then we can be together. He spoke very quickly and held her tightly. The blood in his eyes faded as he said in a trembling voice, "Tell me, okay? Tell me that you don't have no feelings for me. I can feel that in your heart. I'm different. You're different to me." Gong Yimo took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Then she forced herself to be ruthless. She pried open his fingers bit by bit and sighed softly. "Crown Prince Gidge, if you don't return to the palace soon, it will be too late. As for the marriage," she smiled faintly, "Imperial sister is here. I wish you to have a child soon. Goodbye." After saying that, she used her qinggong to jump out of the window. Her words were like a steel knife, making Gong Che feel as if his entire body was pierced by the knife. That heart-wrenching pain spread from his heart to his limbs and bones. It was so painful that he couldn't breathe. That was the first time he had desired it. He longed for his lover so much. He longed for a small response from her. Even if she only hesitated a little, it would be enough. He could still lie to himself. There was still hope. There was still hope. He laid on his back on the bed, as if he had lost consciousness, lost his soul and color. His entire body became so pale. Gong Yimo's last words still rang in his ears, over and over again. She wished him to have a child soon. Ha 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 ha. Have a child soon. Chapter 144. After Gong Dai received the news, he immediately wanted to leave. His sharp gaze swept across the Empress, who had a slightly anxious expression on her face, and he laughed coldly. There were so many of them waiting here, but Gong Che had gone to his house? How interesting. Just as he got up and was about to tell the Empress that he would leave first, an announcement came from afar. "The Crown Prince has arrived." Gong Dai was a little surprised that it was so fast. He thought about it and sat back down. When the anxious women heard this, they all turned their heads to look. A moment later, they saw a white figure staggering over. He walked very quickly, but his hair was messy and he looked drunk. "Che!" The Empress cried out in surprise and hurriedly walked down from the phoenix seat. There was no other reason. She had never seen Gong Che so dispirited. His black hair was draped over his shoulders, his eyes were blurred, and the corner of his mouth carried a mocking sneer. He was originally gentle and strict, but now he looked so unrestrained and dispirited, giving people a kind of enchanting feeling. But he was not happy. He clearly did not cry, but that kind of sadness and pain seemed to fill the air. "Oh, mother?" Gong Che raised the wine bottle and squinted his eyes, trying hard to recognize the person who came. His jade-white face was full of drunkenness, his eyes were watery, and when he smiled, it was quite stunning. "Mother, are you choosing a concubine for me?" His words made many of the noble women present blush. Originally, when they saw Gong Che like this, they were very surprised and did not agree. But a beauty was a beauty. When he was drunk, he looked more lively than his usual gentle and distant appearance. He was so stunning that people could not take their eyes off him. All of the noblewomen's hearts were slightly heated. Now that the crown prince was sitting in the Eastern Palace, as long as he did not make any mistakes, in a few years, no one would be able to shake his position. So marrying him was equivalent to stepping onto the throne of the Empress. Therefore, Gong Che's words made them blush. At the same time, they slightly straightened their bodies, showing their most beautiful side. Unfortunately, Gong Che couldn't see or hear anything right now. His heart was filled with only one thing, only one sentence. Gong Yimo wished him to have a child soon. "Ha ha, have a child soon." The Empress was stunned and hurriedly said, "Stop fooling around. Quickly go and sit down." As she spoke, she called for someone to help her up. The banquet was held in the main hall. The noble ladies sat on the left, while the princes and some other nobles' sons sat on the right. Gong Che's seat was naturally at the head of the right, and he didn't need any guidance at all. Gong Che raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He saw Gong Dai next to him and smiled coldly. Without waiting for anyone to help him, he stumbled over to the men's table. Gong Dai seemed to have sensed something and looked up at him. He saw that he didn't go to his seat, but directly lay on his table. He tilted his head back and took another sip of wine. Then, He leaned very close to Gong Dai and laughed softly. Do you know? I failed. His words made Gong Dai's pupils shrink. He couldn't help but squint his eyes to hide the turmoil in his heart. Failed? He confessed to the royal sister. However, Gong Che couldn't feel his shock at all. Under his black hair, his eyes were extremely dim. He looked at Gong Dai and smiled, as if mocking him. She said, I can't accept things that go against human relations. I can't. You can't either. Ha 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 ha. Che. The Empress was a little anxious. She hurriedly took a few steps forward and called out. She also signaled the palace servants beside her to quickly support him, so that he wouldn't lose his composure again. Gong Che seemed to come back to his senses after being called out by her. He turned around blankly and waved the palace servants away. He walked a few steps and stood in the middle of the hall. The magnificent hall set off his white robe, making him look like an immortal. However, no one could see the sadness in the depths of his eyes. Che, you're drunk. The Empress shook her head bitterly. Suddenly, she regretted asking him to look for Gong Yimo. The Empress sighed and said, he won't be able to choose a concubine in this state. Forget it. Min, the crown prince, is drunk. Send him to the side hall to rest. Gong Che heard this and waved his hand. He didn't smile or move. He stood straight in the middle. Suddenly, the blurriness in his eyes faded away, leaving only coldness and misery. I'm not drunk. These people. Mother, who do you want me to marry? He looked around and his low voice echoed in the hall. Anyone is fine. It won't be her anyway. She won't care. Everyone in the hall was silent, as if they were stunned. All kinds of eyes fell on Gong Che. What happened to the crown prince today? Why did his temperament change so much? Seeing that no one answered, he smiled weakly. Or, who is willing to marry me? The Empress was stunned. After a while, she said, ridiculous. But before she could say anything, a woman suddenly stood up. She walked a few steps, lowered her head, and took down the sachet that she carried with her. Greetings to the crown prince. As she spoke, she carefully held up the sachet. Her cheeks were red, but her voice was unexpectedly clear. The fragrance in this sachet has the effect of refreshing the mind. I hope the crown prince doesn't mind. Many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Was he recommending himself? They had never seen such a proactive woman like Su Miaolon. What made them even more surprised was that Gong Che directly took the sachet. He looked at it and smiled slowly. His smile was so enchanting that it almost stunned people. You want to marry me? His low and gentle voice made Su Miaolon's face turn red. She didn't dare to raise her head. Her appearance, for some reason, made Gong Che smile bitterly. He turned to look at the Empress. Mother, is this woman okay? This action made Su Miaolon extremely embarrassed. Her face was burning as she felt humiliated. But since she had gritted her teeth and taken this step, she couldn't turn back. The Empress quickly stepped forward and stood between the two. She coldly said to the servant, the crown prince is drunk. Send him back to the palace to rest. The servant once again stepped forward to support Gong Che. However, Gong Che laughed softly. He bent down and held his knees as he laughed loudly. But this laughter became more and more miserable, more and more empty. Finally, it was a little crazy. Che, mother. Gong Che interrupted her. He slowly straightened his body and pointed at Su Miaolon. He casually said in a soft voice, since she wants to marry me, then, it's her then. After speaking, he didn't need anyone to support him. He strode away as if he wasn't drunk at all, leaving the table in an uproar. It was decided just like that? This was too casual. Some people secretly hated Su Miaolon's methods and guts. She really went all out. If the crown prince didn't want her in the end, let's see how she can get out of this situation. Su Miaolon's heart was pounding. She really didn't expect that she would get Gong Che's approval so easily. She was going to be the crown princess. She was going to be the crown princess. Chapter 145. Everyone present had different thoughts, but the banquet still had to continue. There were still a few princes who were of a suitable age. Even if she couldn't become the crown prince's consort, she could still become a prince's consort. Gong Che's last few words had caused Gong Dai to panic. For a moment, he was in no hurry to return. He had to think carefully about what Gong Che meant. He had revealed his true feelings, but the royal sister had rejected him? Gong Dai was unconsciously panicking and didn't pay attention to the others. He drank cup after cup, feeling uneasy. He recalled Gong Che's last words to him. She said, she wouldn't accept things that went against human relations. I can't, and you can't either. These few words caused his heart to turn cold. Now, what was the royal sister's mood? She would reject Gong Che, then, as a blood relative, what about him? His heart sank bit by bit. Not only was he her younger brother, but in her heart, she had raised him single-handedly. If Gong Che couldn't do it, Gong Dai couldn't help but drink a few more cups. In his restless mood, he didn't notice that the banquet was gradually becoming more lively. Many princes and noble ladies were cautiously conversing with each other. It was obvious that this kind of banquet made them feel restrained, but at the same time, they were eager to try it out. Are you all right? A person walked in front of Gong Dai. When he raised his head, he saw a very beautiful woman. She seemed to have a gentle personality. However, Gong Dai was currently uneasy. How could he have the mind to pay attention to her? He lowered his head and continued drinking without speaking. Seeing him like this, the woman didn't say anything. She sat down beside him and spoke gently. I am the daughter of the Qin family. I pay my respects to the 9th prince. Qin family. In a flash, Gong Dai thought of Duke Yong. Could this be his daughter, Qin Kuer? Qin Kuer smiled at him. Why are you so unhappy? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and sized her up. Since you know, I would like to ask Miss Qin to leave. His straightforwardness caused Qin Kuer's face to turn pale. She felt humiliated. She wanted to leave immediately, but she thought of something and suppressed her anger as she spoke to him in a low voice. My father invites you. I hope that your Highness 9th Prince will not refuse. With that, she left. After all, she was the most talented woman in the capital. This was the first time she had been put on the spot like this. Unfortunately, if it were any other day, Gong Ju wouldn't listen to her at all. And in another dark room, Gong Che was lying on a bed. His hair was messy and enchanting, but his face was very pale. His eyes were closed, and just by looking at his appearance, he was as beautiful as a sleeping immortal. At this moment, someone came in and knelt at his feet. Your Highness, it's done. His simple words caused Gong Che to slowly open his eyes. In an instant, it seemed as if a stream of light had flashed through them. He blinked a few times in a daze, then smiled deeply. Did you see it with your own eyes? That person lowered his head and said, His Highness the 9th Prince seemed to be distracted by something and drank that cup of wine without paying attention. Gong Che then smiled and closed his eyes again. Who would have thought that he was drunk, but still consciously did such a thing? While he was whispering in Gong Dai's ear, he had also drugged the wine cup in front of Gong Dai. It was a pity that Gong Dai was very cautious. Every pot of wine that was sent to him would be tested for poison. However, Gong Che had drugged the cup and his words had disturbed Gong Dai's state of mind, causing him to be careless and fall into the trap. The subordinate actually couldn't understand. That wasn't a strong poison. So why did he have to go through so much trouble? And Gong Che was lying on the bed with his eyes half closed, as if he was smiling. So what if Gong Yimo had rejected him? He still had a chance. But in the meantime, Gong Dai wouldn't be able to get her. After drinking for a while, Gong Dai felt that something was wrong. His body was getting hotter and hotter. This feeling was actually the same as when he was drugged when he was young. It was just that this drug was extremely strong. If it wasn't for his strong willpower, he was afraid that he would have lost his composure in front of everyone. He stood up with an abnormal flush on his face. The Empress couldn't help but ask with concern, What happened to 9th Highness? Gong Dai's expression was slightly shaken. He lowered his head and said, This son can't handle the alcohol. I'll take my leave first. The Empress was a little puzzled. How can I be at ease with you like this? Someone come. Send 9th Highness to the side chamber to rest. Gong Dai opened his mouth to say that there was no need, but a gentle female body came over. She supported Gong Dai and walked out. Gong Dai's limbs were weak and he couldn't resist. Although the Empress felt that it was strange, she didn't think too much about it. Her heart was still thinking about Gong Che. His appearance just now was too scary. Moreover, she looked at Su Miaolon below and sighed slightly. Would Che really marry her? Su Miaolon wasn't bad. She was pretty, had a good personality, and there was no need to talk about her family background. If they were to get married, she only hoped that Che would change his mind and forget about the past. Gong Dai was brought to a dark room. At this moment, he was using all his strength to restrain himself. He was actually being manipulated by a woman. What kind of drug was this? It was actually so powerful. However, Gong Dai's willpower was still there. At this moment, as long as he didn't think about those things, he could still suppress himself. At this moment, the woman beside him spoke. A familiar voice sounded, and he almost couldn't control himself, because her voice was too similar to Royal Sister's. Gong Dai, don't you want me? In the dark side chamber, a woman whose face couldn't be seen clearly had the same voice as Royal Sister. Gong Dai struggled to open his eyes. He wanted to tell himself that the person taking off his clothes wasn't Royal Sister. However, his resistance gradually weakened. Gong Dai, didn't you say that you love me? If you love me, then show me. The woman's words were like the most rapid and violent sexual desire. Hearing this, Gong Dai suddenly turned over and pushed the woman down. He laid on top of her and gasped for breath. The other party's voice was almost teasing him to the point of insanity. Was it Royal Sister? It was her. She was under him, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. No, it wasn't her. The woman used a voice that was extremely similar to Gong Yimo's to seduce him. Gong Dai, what are you still hesitating for? The last syllable seemed to have ignited a demonic fire. Gong Dai slightly gasped for breath. With a tear of his inner strength, the woman's clothes were completely destroyed. It was a mature woman's body. However, it wasn't Royal Sister. It wasn't her. He reached out his hand and suddenly grabbed the woman's neck. He used a lot of strength this time, causing the woman's two hands to tightly hug his arm. She panicked and said intermittently, Gong Dai, you, let go. Are you going to kill me? That extremely similar voice made Gong Dai confused. His hands loosened and tightened, tightened and loosened. His body was so swollen that it was about to split open. He even had a feeling of compromise. Forget it, whether it was Royal Sister or not. At least he didn't have to suffer like this. But when he thought of Gong Yimo, his mind became clear for a moment. He suddenly used more strength, and with a crack, the woman stopped breathing. After doing all this, he hurriedly ran out of Feng Chi Palace. He couldn't stay here any longer. He couldn't. Gong Yimo was full of thoughts outside for a long time. Only in the evening did she slowly return to the palace. When she came back, everyone's expression was very strange. What's wrong? Seeing the housekeeper hesitate, she couldn't help but ask, Princess, you should quickly go see His Highness. Gong Dai is injured? Gong Yimo was shocked and quickly ran towards Gong Dai's residence. Hey, Princess, wait. His Highness is in your Chiu Shui pavilion. Gong Yimo was surprised. Although it was a bit strange, she still quickly walked towards her residence. Chapter 146. When Gong Che heard the news that Gong Dai had left, he stood up in a hurry. Then he thought of something. Thinking, he slowly sat back down and sneered. It's good that he left. If Gong Dai casually found a woman, it would be enough even if she didn't meet his expectations. If Gong Dai went back to find Immerse, with Immerse's personality, not only would he not succeed, but Immerse would also start to hate him. When the Empress heard that Gong Dai had killed a servant and left the palace, she was shocked. When she looked at the corpse, she found that it was a servant that Che thought highly of. Now that he died here, this matter must be related to Che. She was full of doubts and finally went to the Crown Prince's Eastern Palace. It was already evening. Gong Che had already woken up and was sitting on the bed drinking a hangover soup. When he saw the Empress, he didn't get up or bow. His face didn't even glance in her direction. The Empress' expression was serious. She dismissed her servants and walked over. Che, She wanted to say something but stopped. Do you really want to marry the daughter of the Su family? Gong Che lowered his head and looked down. He continued to drink the soup with an inexplicable expression. Didn't Imperial Mother say that she was a suitable candidate for marriage? That's right. The Empress was afraid that he would suddenly change his mind. She sat beside Gong Che. She knew that she shouldn't ask, but she had to ask. Today, Immerse said that? When he suddenly heard Gong Yimo's name, Gong Che's fingers suddenly tightened. His knuckles turned white from holding the porcelain bowl, and his face became even paler. He raised his head and drank the hangover soup in one gulp. The suffocating pain made his whole body numb. He took a long time to recover. Finally, he said in a trembling voice, "She wished me to have a child soon." When he said this, he seemed to be smiling, but the bowl was almost crushed by him. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress' uneasy face. Imperial Mother already knew this would happen, right? But she still urged him to go. She just wanted him to recognize reality. The Empress's face turned pale at his words. Imperial Mother is only doing this for your own good. For me? Gong Che smiled. He gently placed the porcelain bowl on the table beside the bed and repeated, For me? Yes. You're all doing it for me. You've always done it for me. Suddenly, he lifted his hand and the entire table flipped over. A loud bang was heard. The pot and bowl shattered on the ground. The Empress was shocked by his sudden action and stood up. Just as she was about to say something, she saw Gong Che's terrifying eyes and couldn't say a word. Mother Empress, he cried out in pain. The corners of his mouth curled up as if he was mocking her. You keep saying that it's for me, but do you know what I want? He looked at his palm. During the day, this hand had caressed Gong Yimo's lips and drew her eyebrows, but that was all he could do. He closed his eyes in deep sorrow. I want it. From the beginning to the end, it's only Gong Yimo. The Empress was unable to regain her senses after being yelled at by him for a long time. Gong Che had never been like this. He had always been strong, gentle, and carried everyone's hopes. He had never complained of suffering or tiredness. But now, he was yelling at her and complaining for her. This was the first time he longed for someone, but it was so difficult and he couldn't get anyone's support. The Empress couldn't help but feel heartache. After all, he was her flesh and blood. Mother and son were connected by heart. She could feel his pain. She walked over and squatted down. She held his hand and said softly, Son, I know what you want. Gong Che couldn't help but laugh. So what if she knew? So what if she didn't know? But the Empress's expression was very serious. I will help you. You. As long as you work hard to become the Emperor, I will help you. One day, I will make Gong Yimo your woman. Gong Che looked at her with some surprise. Mother actually said that she was willing to help him with such an unethical thing. The Empress sighed and said, I only hope that you can work hard. You only need to know that only by becoming the Emperor, you can get everything you want. You only need to know this. Gong Che closed his eyes deeply. Mother, I already know. When Gong Yimo hurried to her courtyard, she saw Gong Che soaking in the hot spring with a painful expression. She heaved a sigh of relief. It didn't seem to be a big deal. She approached gently. When she was 5 meters away from Gong Dai, he suddenly opened his eyes. What a pair of eyes. They were like a trapped beast, full of blood vessels. What happened to you? Gong Yimo was shocked. She ran a few steps to Gong Dai's side. Just as she was about to touch his forehead, Gong Dai whispered, Don't move. Gong Yimo's hand froze. She looked at him suspiciously, only to see him staring deeply at her. That feeling. It was as if she was being targeted by a ferocious beast. She was about to be eaten by him. Gong Yimo felt a little uneasy. What happened to you? Gong Dai looked at her and closed his eyes again. His voice was extremely hoarse as he whispered, It's nothing. I was drugged with an aphrodisiac. Soon it will be fine. Aphrodisiac? Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows in surprise. There was an aphrodisiac at this palace banquet? She hurriedly searched her own space, but only saw things like the poison cleansing pill. She took one out and bent down to feed him. Although I don't know if it will work, you should eat one first. She suddenly came closer, and the unique fragrance on her body was caught by Gong Dai's sharp senses. Under the water, his hands were clenched tightly and the veins on his forehead were popping out. Seeing that Gong Dai's mouth was tightly shut, Gong Yimo was a little anxious. She used one hand to pinch his chin to raise his head, while the other hand stuffed the pill into his mouth. Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes and gave her a fright. His gaze was extremely hot and greedy as it fell on Gong Yimo's body. He really, really wanted her. As if he wanted to drag her into the water and tear off her clothes. Gong Yimo was stunned by his gaze. When she regained her senses, the pill in her hand was already in his mouth. That was not enough. He even lightly licked her fingertips. That kind of lingering feeling shocked her, and she immediately retracted her hand. Originally, Gong Dai's willpower was about to collapse. But when he saw Gong Yimo's frightened look, his remaining willpower did not let him forget. There were some things that he could not do now. Now that he had just licked her, she was already scared. If he really could not control himself and did something to her, she would only hate him if she found out about his abnormal relationship. Gong Dai took a deep breath and said softly, "I'm sorry, royal sister. I didn't do it on purpose." He just could not help it. Gong Yimo did not forget that Gong Dai was under the influence of an aphrodisiac, so his actions towards her were very likely due to the aphrodisiac. It was probably because of what happened during the day that her nerves were too tense, so she had such a big reaction. Thinking of this, she slightly heaved a sigh of relief and asked, "How is it? Is this drug effective?" The pill was like a stone sinking into the sea. Gong Dai wanted to say that it was much better, but seeing Gong Yimo kneeling by the pool and looking at him eagerly, those bright eyes and slightly open little mouth were all tempting him. Chapter 147. Gong Dai seemed to be seduced as his eyes stared straight at her, and his body gradually moved closer. Her posture of kneeling and bending over outlined the curves of her body. Gong Dai could not help but be infatuated with the thought that his royal sister had grown up and could already be enjoyed. His Adam's apple moved. Before Gong Yimo could notice, he leaned over to the side of the pool and suddenly reached out to grab her. "What's wrong?" Gong Yimo forced a smile as she looked at him. She thought to herself that she had really seen a ghost these past few days. Why did everyone become so strange? The vigilance in her eyes deeply pierced Gong Dai. Obviously, he was the closest person to her. She should be able to accept him more easily, right? Closest and most loved were only one word apart. If he could be her closest relative, why couldn't he be her most loved? Gong Dai got up from the water and leaned forward to get closer to Gong Yimo. The smell of her body was so mesmerizing and sweet, like the smell of melted sugar. When he breathed it into his body, it turned into fire. He desired it so much. A long time ago, when he was drugged, he had desired it so much. Gong Yimo's hand hurt from his grip. Her heart began to feel uneasy. What kind of aphrodisiac could have such a strong effect? How much did he take? She was his royal sister. Actually, other than the initial strong effects of the aphrodisiac, it was within his tolerance range. That was why he was able to smoothly return to the residence and come to Gong Yimo's courtyard. But when he saw her, the aphrodisiac in his body seemed to suddenly explode. He became more and more unable to control himself. In his heart, he even thought that this was good. Using the aphrodisiac as an excuse, if he took her because of it, then he would be able to break through their relationship. What a perfect excuse. He had no choice. He had no choice. Gong Dai's eyes lit up and were filled with desire. He was getting closer and closer. Gong Yimo was already prepared. As long as he came closer, she would immediately run away. Although she might not be able to defeat Gong Dai, running away was not a problem. Her attitude was written all over her face. She no longer had any feelings for him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be like this. Gong Dai suddenly felt heartache. He loved someone so much, but even letting her know was an extravagant hope. He leaned closer to her and sighed softly. Before she could get up, he whispered, "Don't worry. When I came back, I already asked Lo Chi to make the antidote. Royal sister, you Go get it for me." Having said that, he loosened his grip slightly. Gong Yimo immediately jumped up and nodded her head hurriedly. "Don't worry. I'll get you the antidote right away." After that, he ran away quickly. Gong Dai sighed as he watched her leave. He couldn't be like Gong Che because Gong Yimo wouldn't accept him. She wouldn't accept her brother who was also her blood relative. He could not do anything to her that could not be undone. Once he did something, Gong Yimo would only run away. That was not what he wanted to see. Why was it so difficult to get someone? Gong Dai slowly walked out of the water. Step by step, he stumbled towards Gong Yimo's room. He buried himself in Gong Yimo's bed and took a deep breath. Her bed was raised high by her. Once he lay on it, it was soft and soft. However, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that the blanket was filled with her scent. That sweet scent enveloped him, causing him to sink deep into it. He almost went crazy. His hands clutched the blanket tightly. Suddenly, he let out a long howl. But he couldn't let it go. He couldn't. He only wanted Gong Yimo. Everything was Gong Yimo. After Gong Yimo ran out in a panic, she searched for Lo Chi for a while. At this moment, he was running over with a small box. She caught him red-handed. "Is this the antidote?" Lo Chi quickly nodded. "Quickly give it to Her Highness." Gong Yimo immediately took it from him. "Thank you. I'll go now." When Gong Yimo returned, she looked around the courtyard but didn't find anyone. Strange. Could it be that Gong Dai couldn't resist going out to relieve himself? Gong Yimo didn't know what to do with the antidote. At this moment, she heard a strange sound. She frowned and realized that the sound was coming from her room. Hence, she quickly walked towards the source of the sound. She walked slower and slower. Her footsteps were hesitant, and her face was full of shock. This low moaning sound was Gong Dai's voice. But why did it sound like he was doing something that was not suitable for children? But there were so few girls in the entire Qi Manor. Who had Gong Dai caught? She was suspicious. Her footsteps became lighter as she approached. That sound was lingering and intermittent. She listened with great effort for a long time. Then, she confirmed that it was indeed Gong Dai's voice. But she only heard a male voice and not a female voice. Which meant, cough cough, Gong Dai was doing it himself? Gong Yimo stood at the door, feeling a little embarrassed. Should she send the antidote in or not? It would be too awkward to send it in now. It's better not to do it. After hesitating for a while, she prepared to leave. But then she thought of something and revealed a naughty smile. She had never encountered such a situation before. She didn't expect that Gong Dai, who was usually such a cold person, would cry out like this. After hesitating for a moment, her curiosity won out. She sneakily inched closer, afraid that Gong Dai would discover her. Then, she held her breath and continued to eavesdrop in a very wretched manner. This feeling of being a thief made her heart beat wildly. Moreover, the other party's moaning sound really made her blush. Royal sister. These two sudden words made Gong Yimo's body tremble. She abruptly straightened her body. Her face was red all the way to her neck. Then, she turned around and ran. She thought that Gong Dai had discovered her and warned her. So, as she ran, she thought, how did Gong Dai become so powerful? Her Qinggong was top-notch. But with this top-notch Qinggong and holding her breath, he still noticed her outside the door. Oh my God! She patted her red face and calmed her violent heartbeat. She panted slightly and finally sighed. Eavesdropping was actually discovered by the person involved. How could she have fun in the future? But she ran too fast. She completely didn't expect that Gong Dai didn't just shout once. He even called her name after that. He kept calling her name. She also didn't notice that when Gong Dai called out royal sister, those two words were said with such a lingering tone. It was just two words, but it was as if he had sucked them on the tip of his tongue countless times. That kind of passion. Royal sister. Gong Yimo. Gong Dai had already lost consciousness. He could only repeat those few words to relieve himself. At the last moment, he sighed deeply and slowly opened his eyes. There would be a day. There would be a day when he would make her willingly submit to him on this bed. Chapter 148. The next day, the news of the crown prince's wedding spread like wildfire. Although the imperial edict had not been issued yet, everyone was talking about it. Gong Yimo leaned over a small table in the tea house and heard the news. She was so shocked that she immediately sat up. Gong Che was going to marry Su Miaolon. Don't tease me, okay? She was at a loss. No matter how she thought about it, she could not figure it out. When did Gong Che become so familiar with Su Miaolon? There was even news of him personally appointing her as his imperial concubine. At this moment, Gong Dai walked towards her. Royal sister, are you talking about this shop's cloud cake? After the previous incident, Gong Dai was probably afraid that she would feel awkward, so he acted as if nothing had happened. He did not mention anything about her eavesdropping, which made her heave a sigh of relief. Today, when he heard that she was going out, Gong Dai was worried. Since he had nothing to do, he went out with her. When they passed by the hawker shop that Gong Che pointed to last time, Gong Yimo had an idea and asked him to buy some of the cloud cake that was rumored to have been sold in the capital for more than 20 years. Gong Yimo ate a piece with an indescribable expression. She felt that it was too greasy. With this level of sweetness, could it be that it was not a sugar cake? Gong Dai sat down opposite her and poured himself a cup of tea. They were now in a simple disguise. Otherwise, with Gong Dai's face that was becoming more and more enchanting as he grew up, they would be surrounded by people. What's wrong? Seeing that her mood was not right, Gong Dai looked up and asked. At this moment, his hand was holding the cup. His fair fingers and the rough sand bowl formed a sharp contrast. Even though he looked ordinary now, when those black, jade-like eyes glanced at him, there was a kind of seductive beauty. Gong Yimo was shaken by those fingers. She lowered her head and pondered. Why did Crown Prince Gij appoint Su Miaolon as his imperial concubine? I can't figure it out. Her words made Gong Dai's pupils shrink. Then, he slowly smiled. Maybe it was love at first sight. His words made Gong Yimo even more confused. Let Su Miaolon marry Gong Che? She was really unwilling. Although the imperial edict had not been issued yet, it seemed to be a done deal. But why did it have to be Su Miaolon? There were so many women in the capital. Why did it have to be her? Could this be the legendary fate? Seeing that Gong Yimo seemed to have something on her mind, Gong Dai narrowed his eyes as if he knew what she was thinking. Royal sister doesn't want the crown prince to marry? Or do you just not want him to marry Su Miaolon? Gong Yimo was surprised by his keen senses. After a while, she nodded shyly. I don't want him to marry Su Miaolon. Her words made Gong Dai slightly happy, but Gong Yimo said again, Can you help me send a letter to the Empress? Gong Dai's expression was indescribable. The crown prince finally chose a woman. No matter what you say, royal sister, she won't change her mind, right? Gong Yimo gritted her teeth. I'll try. No, I can only say that it's their fate. Gong Dai pondered for a moment and nodded. Gong Yimo was a little surprised, but Gong Dai smiled slightly. This smile seemed to disperse the cold air. Whatever royal sister wants to do, I will do it for you. For a moment, Gong Yimo was very moved. She didn't raise this child in vain. On the same afternoon, the Empress received Gong Yimo's letter. It was only a few sentences. Will the promise of that day be fulfilled today? The crown prince's marriage must be with the Su family? The Empress lamented in her heart. She was afraid that Gong Che would suddenly break the engagement, but before Che did anything, Gong Yimo wrote a letter to her. She understood Gong Yimo's intentions. In the beginning, she had knelt down and begged Gong Yimo to plead on Che Er's behalf. She had promised to bring up this request in the future. She didn't expect Gong Yimo to bring it up now. She handed the letter to Water Deity. Water Deity looked at it and frowned slightly, as if she didn't understand. According to the princess, it seems that as long as it's not the Su family's daughter, anyone is fine. The Empress had a headache, but Che said those words to the Su family's daughter in public. If he doesn't marry her, won't he make enemies? Water Deity pondered for a moment. When His Highness was drunk, how could his drunken words count? Moreover, His Highness didn't go to His Majesty to ask for a marriage decree these days. I'm afraid he's regretting it. The Empress thought for a moment and said, Hongxiu, I'm here. She handed the letter in her hand to her and said, Send this letter to the Crown Prince and explain the reason. Everything, should be decided by him.
Yes.
Eastern Palace. Crown Prince, you can't. The Crown Prince's subordinate, Su Sheng, knelt in front of Gong Che with a serious face. That Su Miaolon is the Marquis' only legitimate daughter and is deeply loved by the Marquis. If His Highness breaks the engagement, won't the Marquis lose face? Gong Che stood with his hands behind his back and didn't look at the people at his feet. I won't marry. As for the Marquis, I'll personally go and apologize. It's my fault for the slip of the tongue after drinking. Seeing his insistence, Su Sheng looked at the others. After the other advisors looked at each other, they all knelt down. Crown Prince, please reconsider. Gong Che was unmoved and continued to walk out. At this moment, Hong Xiu came over. Seeing the situation, she didn't say a word. Instead, she knelt down and attached a letter. Gong Dai hesitantly opened the letter. Gong Yimo's handwriting made him suddenly happy. However, the content made him slightly absent-minded. Everyone, leave, he ordered. Everyone looked at each other, and then they all retreated obediently. In the conference hall, only Gong Che and Hong Xiu were left. Seeing that everyone had left, Hong Xiu explained the matter to the Crown Prince. When Gong Che heard it, he suddenly laughed and sat on the armchair at the side. He knew that the Empress had begged Gong Yimo to help. He also knew that his Empress mother owed Gong Yimo a favor. However, she actually used such an opportunity exchanged with the position of princess, to make such a request. Tell me, why doesn't she like Su Miaolon? The Crown Prince asked blankly. His eyes were empty, as if he was absent-minded. However, the pain in his eyes moved Hong Xiu. She lowered her head and thought for a while. I heard that Princess and Miss Su had a conflict before. I think Princess doesn't like her. Yes, I don't like her. Gong Che also thought of this and suddenly laughed. You don't like her, so you want me to marry someone else? Ha ha ha. Gong Yimo, what do you think I am? What do you think I am? You don't care at all. You can't wait to let me marry someone else. You really don't have a trace of love for me. He closed his eyes, and the sudden increase in his voice gave Hong Xiu a fright. She lowered her body and said in a trembling voice, Your Highness, please calm down. Her Majesty means, it's all up to Your Highness now. She will respect your wishes. No need. That's all. Hasn't my crown princess been decided long ago? Gong Dai sneered and read the letter again as if he was torturing himself. The more he read, the more he wanted to laugh. Just a few words, completely ignoring his feelings. She doesn't want me to marry Su Miaolon, but I want to. Hong Xiu saw the crown prince's face turn pale and his eyes red. She couldn't help but advise him in a sorrowful voice. Your Highness, please don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Please think thrice before you act. Think thrice. Gong Dai's hand clenched the letter tightly and smiled. His smile was so cold and miserable. There's nothing to think thrice. She was willing to use such an opportunity to make such a request. Perhaps, if I marry Su Miaolon, she will give me another look. Chapter 149. After speaking, Gong Che strode out without caring about Hong Xiu's shock. He was going to ask for an imperial decree to marry Su Miaolon. The moment Su Miaolon received the imperial decree, she couldn't believe it was true. After waiting for a few days, she was actually prepared for Gong Che to break the engagement. She even thought that if Gong Che really broke the engagement, she would force the marriage with her death. Anyway, she had already done this much. If she didn't marry Gong Che, she would really be the laughing stock of the capital. But she didn't expect that the crown prince would really marry her. She was the real crown prince's wife. When Gong Yimo heard this, she was speechless for a long time. At this time, the Empress's reply was also passed to her. The general idea was that she didn't do it this time. Next time, she would try her best. But she didn't want anything. She just didn't want Su Miaolon to marry Gong Che. She had already let go of many things in her previous life, but she couldn't let go for a long time. Why did Su Miaolon still marry Gong Che in the end? Was this fate? If the path was the same no matter how she changed it, would she still be killed by Gong Dai in the end? Then she laughed. How could it be? Didn't she save Shun Shi Yi and Empress Lu? Speaking of Shun Shiyi, she almost forgot that she still owed Shun Shiyi a meal of wine. It was time to make it up to him. Recently, Gong Dai was busy with military affairs and didn't have much time to accompany her. She could sneak out to play with Shun Shiyi. Shun Shiyi was now the left guard of the Imperial Army. He was in charge of the affairs in the city and had 10,000 people under him. Naturally, he wasn't as free as before. But if Gong Yimo wanted to see him, there was still a way. At night, Shun Shiyi returned to the residence tiredly. Thanks to Gong Yimo, his father was so frightened by the head in his hand that he lost control of his bladder. After seeing who it was, he cried out and flew into a rage. This shock and anger was forcibly stopped after seeing the gold medal in Shun Shiyi's hand and the old lady's cold face. He was so depressed that he was bedridden. Now, he could be considered half a cripple. Therefore, Shun Shiyi had the final say in this Wangfu. Usually, no one was allowed to enter his room. Therefore, after he entered the room, he poured himself a cup of tea. However, the lingering fragrance of a woman on the teacup surprised him. "Who is it?" He. There was a burst of laughter, and the pleasant laughter rang out in the silent night, making his scalp tingle. Before Shun Shiyi could react, a pair of hands covered his eyes, and a playful female voice pressed against his ear and asked, "Guess who I am?" After confirming who it was, all of Shun Shiyi's anger turned into a smile. He revealed his white teeth and snorted in an extremely irritating tone. "I was wondering who it was. It turns out to be a despicable person who doesn't keep his word." Gong Yimo removed her hand and glared at him. "Who are you calling a villain?" Shun Shiyi looked back and saw that it was indeed her. His eyebrows were slightly smiling as he crossed his chest and sneered condescendingly. "Whoever doesn't fulfill their promise after returning to the capital is a villain." Seeing that he was angry, Gong Yimo smiled and took out 2 leather bags from her bosom. "Am I that kind of person? You're lucky today. This is the best wine used by the Imperial Palace. There are only a dozen jars a year." Shun Shiyi subconsciously took one of the leather bags. The smooth leather still had Gong Yimo's body temperature. He didn't know what to think, but his cheeks turned slightly red. "Humph. This little wine is not enough for this young master to drink. Don't talk big." Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. "This wine was improved by this young lady. I guarantee that you won't be able to get up from work tomorrow." As she spoke, she sat down at the table. Shun Shiyi remembered that Gong Yimo was a glutton, so he went out to order some food and wine before coming in. Today, he was considerate and reliable. Compared to the past, he was much better. Finally able to sit down and chat, Gong Yimo was not restrained. She looked around and wondered, "I wanted to ask you last time. You're already so old. Even brother Crown Prince is getting married. Why aren't you married yet?" This matter could be said to be the matter that everyone in King Ping's residence was most worried about. Shun Shiyi was almost 20 years old. Every time his grandmother saw him, she would nag at him. In the end, she would definitely cry a few times. It was really annoying. He raised the bag of wine and drank directly. In the end, he almost spat it out. The wine was still the Jade Pear Workshop's tribute wine that he was familiar with. But why was the taste so much more spicy? This mouthful made his jade face flush red. Under his thick eyebrows, his large eyes became watery. Gong Yimo laughed proudly and took a small sip. She narrowed her eyes and said, "How is it? In order to accept your invitation, I brought all the best wine from the bottom of my chest. But looking at you, it seems that you can't take it?" "Who are you saying can't take it?" Shun Shiyi resisted the urge to stick out his tongue and glared at her. That look was really seductive, causing one's heart to flutter. Looking at his beauty, Gong Yimo took another sip of the strong wine, as if this was the only way to wash away the faint unhappiness in her heart. Shun Shiyi panted a few times. Seeing Gong Yimo drinking sullenly, although there was a smile on her face, he was still keenly aware of her unhappiness. He hissed and said angrily, "You're still talking about me. Aren't you almost 14 years old? In this city, which girl hasn't been married at the age of 14? Do you want to keep yourself as an old maid?" Gong Yimo waved her hand impatiently. "I want to be an old maid. Besides, if I get married, there won't be anyone to drink with you. Have you thought it through?" Shin Shiyi raised his eyebrows and said in an extremely dismissive tone, "So what? Why don't you just marry me?" As soon as he finished speaking, Gong Yimo's pair of beautiful eyes glanced at him, as if trying to discern whether he was joking or being serious. Shin Shiyi didn't dare to look at her. He shook the wine bag in his hand and said, "Marry this young master. I don't dare to say anything else, but this young master will take care of Jade Pear Lane's tribute wine." Gong Yimo burst out laughing. She patted him on the shoulder and said, "Just based on your words, if I want to marry in the future, I'll definitely consider you." She was originally joking, but Shun Shi's ears turned red. He, who had always been fearless, didn't dare to think too deeply about the truth in her words. After 30 minutes of drinking, Gong Yimo ate her fill with wine, dishes, and pastries. Shun Shi's eyes were also slightly red. It was obvious that he was a little drunk. "Now that the capital is making it difficult for you to move around, in the future, what do you want to do?" Hearing his worried words, Gong Yimo waved her hand carelessly. "Since this young master can't stay here, there will be other places for me. Why bother?" Chapter 150. Shin Shiyi snorted as he thought about how Gong Dai was so protective of Gong Yimo in private. It wasn't that Shin Shiyi hadn't gone to look for her, but he was stopped by someone. "If you want to leave, I'm afraid you can't." "Why? Isn't it because you have a good brother?" Shin Shiyi sneered. "He's a good person, but unfortunately, he can't protect you now." His expression turned serious as he said this. "The last time I went to look for you, I didn't manage to see you because Gongju was keeping a close eye on you. However, I sent someone to keep watch for a long time and found a suspicious person. Unfortunately, they didn't catch him." Gong Yimo snorted as she lay on the table. She wasn't listening to him seriously. Shin Shiyi couldn't help but sigh. How did he fall for such a careless girl? "You have a special status now. If you're not careful, you'll be destroyed. Can't you be more serious?" Gong Yimo looked up at him. "It's the same whether I'm on guard or not. Besides, I have bigger dreams. I don't have time to care about these twists and turns." Shin Shiyi teased. "Marry yourself off soon?" Gong Yimo looked up at him with disdain. "No, I won't think about these messy things as long as I don't achieve my dreams." Her words surprised Shun Shiyi. "What are your thoughts? Tell me about them." Perhaps it was because she had drunk too much. Gong Yimo didn't have much to worry about. She leaned closer to him and said mysteriously, "I'm thinking a lot. I want the 4 countries to open up trade and wealth to come from everywhere." Shun Shiyi was about to laugh at her for being a money grubber when she continued, "I want Lu Yi to not have to harass our great Yu and Yuheng every day because of a lack of food and clothing. I want Yuheng to not have to be sandwiched between 2 large countries, where it's as difficult as ascending to the heavens for its citizens to walk out of that narrow space. I want Yuchi to not have to think that there's a woman in power, and that there's endless internal strife and the flames of war everywhere. I want every small country in the surrounding area to not have to worry and fear, and to have to contribute most of their labor to steal peace." She stood up and waved her hand heroically. She looked at him as if she could see the vast and endless land through him. "Of course, this is what I want the most. It's for our Dai state to start a new chapter of prosperity. All hardworking people will be able to live a prosperous life. The old will have someone to rely on, and the young will have talents. Then, in the decades that I'm here, don't have wars." Her words caused Shin Shiyi to be stunned. He didn't expect to hear such words. Her words caused his mind to suddenly become chaotic. Gong Yimo looked at Shun Shiyi's expression and laughed with her hands on her hips. "Don't you think that I'm too arrogant for boasting in front of you right now? Ha ha ha." She stopped laughing and looked at Shin Shiyi. Her eyes were watery, and there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "But what should I do? This is really all I want. I don't want to like someone. It will numb my mind and make me narrow-minded. I don't want to get married. That small space is not my world." People often say that a woman's home is a hero's grave, but men's charms can lead people astray. Speaking of this, she didn't look serious again. With one hand on the table and the other on Shun Shiyi's chin, she said with a smirk on her face, It's just like your face. It's so seductive. It makes people unconsciously biased when they see it. Ye's heart couldn't calm down. He couldn't understand how a woman could have such thoughts in this world. No, no, no. Not only women, but even men would not do that. When men set up their careers in the world, they would usually only consider their own country. But she was different. She even wanted to help other countries. This idea was not acceptable to the world. No one would trust her. If it was an ordinary person, it would be fine. But it was a woman with such amazing talent like her. This kind of idea would only bring disaster to her. No one in any country would understand that it was impossible to do such a thing. You must be thinking that I'm in a fantasy? Yi heard her suddenly calm voice and looked up in surprise. But he bumped into her pair of sparkling eyes. His heart stopped, and he almost forgot to breathe. Gong Yimo's cheeks turned red, and then she smiled. I will do it. I may not be able to do everything, but I will try my best to reach the limit. Just wait. One day, I will invite you to drink Yuchi's cloud ginger wine. I will do what I say. With that, she seemed to groan and softly fall down. Yi hurriedly caught her. Seeing that she was only drunk, he suppressed his fear and smiled. But with you like this, when will I be able to marry you? Just as he was holding Gong Yimo and was about to put her on the bed, a cold wind blew and a cold sword was placed on his neck. His originally good mood turned cold. Gong Dai's face was even colder than his as he appeared behind him. Put her down. There was obviously no emotion, but that voice seemed to be able to seep out ice. Yi sneered. What if I say no? As soon as his words fell, Gong Dai's sword left a bloody mark on his neck. No. You can go to hell. Ugh. Just as the killing intent was running rampant, Gong Yimo suddenly moaned and moved uncomfortably in his arms. Yi looked at her, and a trace of tenderness and helplessness flashed through his eyes. He gently placed her on the bed. Sometimes I am really curious. She is only your sister. You are watching her too closely. After putting down Gong Yimo, Yi turned around and looked at Gong Dai, who was emitting a cold aura. He laughed mockingly. Or, do you have some unspeakable thoughts about your sister? His words made Gong Dai suddenly very nervous as he looked at Gong Yimo. Seeing that she was still sleeping soundly, his eyes narrowed and a trace of killing intent appeared. Between me and royal sister, there is no need for an outsider like you to interfere. Outsider? Yi saw that the sword was still on his neck, but he was not afraid and crossed his arms over his chest. What if I marry her? Hiss. The narrow sword made a deep gash on his neck, and blood immediately gushed out. Gong Dai coldly looked at the way he squatted down and covered his wound. He faintly smiled. His cold eyes were like a demon's that could enchant people's eyes. Royal sister. As long as she has me, it's enough. Gong Dai's slightly cold eyes revealed a trace of gentleness. He tilted his head and looked at Yi. He faintly smiled. As for you, if I remember correctly, you have a very close grandmother? His words made Yi's eyes widen. You dare? I dare. Gong Dai looked down at him with an extremely cold and condescending expression. A trace of cruelty flashed across his face. If you want to steal the most important person to me, why can't I? Kill the person closest to you. The last syllable was accompanied by a sudden smile. His godlike appearance actually left Yi speechless. Chapter 151. Gong Yimo was carried home by Gong Dai. The cold wind blew against his robes, but he protected Gong Yimo so that she did not feel the slightest bit of coldness. Looking at her quiet little face, Gong Dai smiled faintly. How could he not know how many gazes were fixed on him? Almost every night, there would be a massacre in the Qi Manor, and the next day, there would be many corpses thrown into the mass grave. Those who were spying on him all wanted to know about his royal sister. He was even more aware that sending the royal sister away at this time was the best decision, but he did not want to. He deeply hated his own incompetence. Little did he know how much pressure he had put on himself. However, no matter how monstrous a 13-year-old youth was, it was impossible for him to be a match for the entire imperial city. Looking at Gong Yimo's peaceful sleeping face, Gong Dai sighed softly. What should I do with you? After returning to the manor, Lo Chi glanced at Gong Yimo and said in a low voice, the arrangements have been made. The other party said that in less than 3 days, Li Ku will undoubtedly die. Gong Dai nodded, indicating that he understood, and walked towards Gong Yimo's courtyard. Li Ku's recent days had been very difficult. Although he was the legitimate son of the Minister of Revenue, his status could be considered honorable, and he had recently been greatly supported by Imperial concubine Long. Even if others were angry, at most they would make him suffer a little. It was very difficult to truly take his life. However, Gong Dai was different. From the moment he returned to the capital, he had been thinking about how to take his dog life. Now, all he had to do was wait for news of his death. This was the only good news during this period of time. After placing Gong Yimo on the bed, he let out a sigh of relief. Thinking that Gong Yimo seemed to be unhappy about Su Miaolon marrying Gong Che during the day, he felt a little vexed. Originally, he thought that it would be good for Su Miaolon to marry Gong Che, and he would be happy to facilitate it. However, Gong Yimo's unwillingness made him hesitate. In any case, as long as Gong Che got married, it did not matter if it was Su Miaolon or not. Since the royal sister did not like her so much, should he just make her disappear? However, if Su Miaolon died, what would he do if Gong Che took the opportunity to not marry again? He sat beside Gong Yimo's bed and frowned slightly. It was only at this moment that he felt like a young man. The troubles of worrying about personal gains and losses were a path that everyone had to go through as they grew up. Gong Yimo slept soundly. She frowned and smacked her lips as if she was dreaming of delicious food. Gong Ju looked at her and suddenly leaned a little closer to her. He placed one hand on the side of her face and observed her sleeping face up close. The royal sister was getting more and more beautiful. Putting aside the fact that beauty was in the eye of the beholder, Gong Yimo was indeed getting more and more outstanding. Her face was as if it was delicately painted by a master painter. She was so beautiful that she did not look like a real person. However, as the saying goes, the appearance is born from the heart. The calmness between her eyebrows that seemed to be able to contain all things was something that no woman in this world could possess. The casual elegance of her movements was also built on her strong self-confidence. Just these 2 points alone made her unparalleled in the world. Looking at her like this, Gong Dai felt an inexplicable thirst. Ever since the last time, he did not dare to get too close to Gong Yimo, because as soon as he got close to her, he felt something stirring in the depths of his heart, making him increasingly unable to control himself. However, she was so attractive to him that he could not help but move forward a little, and a little more. The bed under him was the same one he had laid on that day. On this bed, he fantasized about his royal sister doing that kind of thing. Just thinking about it made him feel even more thirsty. His body seemed to be desperately thirsting for something, but he suppressed it with all his might to not explode. Just a kiss. Just like how she kissed his forehead when she said goodnight when they were young. Just a kiss. Thinking of this, Gong Dai carefully lowered his body, held his breath, and gently kissed her forehead. That warm, jade-like touch made him feel blessed. His eyes unconsciously fell on her cherry lips. With a somewhat greedy gaze, he stared deeply. It should not be like this. Once the royal sister finds out, it will be over. Reason told him this and tried hard to wake him up. However, his eyes became more and more infatuated. That pair of jade-like eyes seemed to flash with a misty light, reflecting a blurry color. Gong Yimo's fair face seemed to be faintly glowing in this kind of night. Under those lightly trembling eyelashes, there was a little red that made him unable to tear his eyes away. Can't be like this. He was still her royal brother. She would not accept it. He had to endure until the time was right. Then, he would move her bit by bit. He panted slightly. Holding his breath for a long time made his jade face turn slightly red. His heart repeatedly told him to endure, but at this moment, Gong Yimo moved her arms slightly. The moment her collar opened, it was a beauty that he had never seen before. Gong Dai's breathing stagnated and his eyes darkened slightly. A gust of cold wind blew, causing the windows to rustle slightly. However, Gong Dai could not hear it at all. In this small space, it was so hot that it could make one go crazy. Endure. He could endure so many times, so why couldn't he endure now? But how long did he have to endure? Just this once, just this once. His heart warned himself again. However, his body had long been suppressed. Trembling, he lightly touched her lips. It was as if he had returned to that night in the desolate miasma plains. That familiar feeling of craziness instantly swallowed him. I want it so much. I want it so much. Why can't blood relatives do it? She was clearly the woman he loved the most. In his absent-mindedness, not only did he lick her lips, he even nibbled on her lips. That increasingly urgent action made Gong Yimo could not help but let out a moan. Once she let out a sound, Gong Dai, as if he had just woken up from a dream, quickly leaned back. He looked left and right. From the corner of his eyes, he saw that Gong Yimo did not move again. Only then did he dare to look at her. His heart was thumping like a thief. He was ready to leave, but he stood up, sat down, and stood up again. In the end, he did not understand how to suppress the unsatisfied feeling in his heart. His gaze, once again, fell on Gong Yimo's body. So this was his poison, and also the only antidote. Obviously, he knew that he should not, but his rationality had long disappeared. Once again, he eagerly sucked on Gong Yimo's lips. The beautiful touch there simply made him sigh in happiness. However, from the bottom of his heart, he suddenly revealed an infinite amount of bitterness. The sour and astringent feeling spread to his limbs and bones. He was screaming in his heart. When exactly would he be able to have her? When would he not have to sneak around like this, but kiss her openly, and she would also accept it with a smile? Why was it so difficult? Why did it have to be her younger brother? In the past, this was the greatest happiness in his life. He did not expect that one day, this would actually be his greatest pain. If it was not her younger brother, he would not have met her. If it was her younger brother, he could not have her. He could not accept it. If this was fate, he also wanted to go against the heavens and change his fate. Chapter 152. When Gong Dai left, it was already late into the night. The moment he closed the door, Gong Yimo couldn't hold it in any longer and suddenly opened her eyes. She could still feel the slight numbness on her lips. When he kissed her, she could also feel his joy and sweetness. Gong Yimo felt as though she had lost her soul and her brain couldn't even function. As she wasn't in a good mood, she didn't drink much and fell asleep. When Gong Dai bit her, she woke up, but because the scene was too awkward, she pretended to be asleep. As for Gong Dai, because he was flustered, he didn't realize that she had already woken up. She thought that her movement would definitely scare Gong Dai away, but she didn't expect that not only was he not scared, after a while, he still kissed her again and again. Licked and kissed, lingered. That deep and sweet feeling between tossing and turning made her flustered. God knows how much effort she used to control her breathing so that it didn't change. Otherwise, if Gong Dai realized that she had woken up, she really didn't know how to face him. Gong Dai, why did he like her? For so many years, she had treated him as a brother, a friend, and even a child. But the only thing that she couldn't treat him as a lover was how old he was. He was only 13 years old. Such a young child. How could he have such thoughts? She thought of her past life. Because Su Miaolon treated him well, so he was dead set on Su Miaolon. Then in this life, was it the same? Just because she treated him well, so he developed feelings for her? Actually, it was just a kind of attachment and gratitude, not love. It was just because he was young and couldn't differentiate. Oh right, she almost forgot. There was a period of time when a teenager would have a hazy good impression of the older woman beside him. This was a normal phenomenon. It was all her fault for not realizing it in time and correcting it in time. Now, it shouldn't be too late, right? At this moment, the sound of slapping on the window woke her up. It turned out that it was snowing. This winter night really made her feel extremely cold. Gong Yimo sat up and grabbed her blanket with both hands. She looked confused. She tried to recall what was strange about Gong Dai in the past. In the end, it was fine if she didn't pay attention. But now that she thought about it, There was something wrong everywhere. Gong Yimo scratched her head in annoyance. When did Gong Dai start to like her? She was so careless that she didn't realize it until now. So now, what was she going to do? Gong Yimo was deep in thought. Should she make things clear to Gong Dai and slowly guide him back to the right path? Or should she run away from home and let Gong Dai calm down? Logic told her that the first option was more acceptable to teenagers, but she felt that she couldn't face Gong Dai and wanted to choose the second option. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, the snow outside the window gradually stopped. Specks of white fluttered down, and it started to snow. As Gong Yimo was highly skilled in martial arts, Gong Dai had never sent anyone to follow her out of fear that she would feel disgusted. However, he had still set up layers of defenses in the entire Qi Manor. Recently, there had been many night patrols, especially recently. Basically, there would be such a scene every night. Just as Gong Yimo was feeling vexed, the sound of fighting could be heard from afar. It seemed that they were all here to find her. Recently, the Qi Manor had become more and more restless. If this continued, Gong Dai wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. She hugged her knees and waited quietly. However, unlike in the past, the battles were ended quickly. This time, the sounds of fighting did not subside for a long time. She understood that the other party was determined to find her. Since they dared to make such a big fuss, it was likely that they were certain that she was here. Gong Yimo thought for a moment and suddenly got up. Right now, everyone's attention was focused on that area. This was the time when the manor's defenses were at their weakest. She had the space, and there was nothing to pack. After some thought, she left a note, hoping that Gong Dai would not be angry when he saw this note. Your Highness, don't worry. Although there are many people in this group, they are no match for us. There is still morning court tomorrow, so your Highness should rest early. As Lo Chi spoke, Gong Dai, who was wearing a black robe, looked at the corpses being dragged away. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Have you found out who they are? Lo Chi asked in a low voice. Although they are well hidden, we can still tell that there are 3 groups of people. There are 2 from the palace and 1 more that we have not found yet. The unknown was the most annoying thing. Gong Dai's cold gaze fell on the few people who were still stubbornly resisting. To be able to cultivate such skilled death warriors, it seemed that the power behind them was not ordinary. Continue to investigate. As long as they move, there will be traces left behind. These words were taught to him by Gong Yimo. Yes. The sound of killing gradually stopped. Gong Dai rubbed his forehead tiredly and then went to rest. After entering the room, he casually called someone over. Xiaoqi, there was quite a commotion just now. Go and see if Royal Sister was awakened. Also, clean up the corpses. I don't want her to see any traces.
Yes.
After giving the order, Gong Dai once again lay on the bed. But this time, he did not lie down for long. Xiaoqi suddenly ran in a panic. His face was pale. How dare he do such a disgraceful thing? Gong Dai did not have time to care. Because of Xiaoqi's words, his mind went blank. After a long time, he found his voice. You said, Royal Sister is missing? Gong Yimo braved the wind and snow alone in the suburbs. She did not have a specific direction. In fact, she did not know where she should go. She only knew that she should keep walking and not look back. She did not know if it was because it was too cold, but she felt that she could not think. Why did Gong Dai and Gong Che both like her? In her previous life, these 2 clearly hated her. In this life, she treated them as family. She treated them so well. She only wanted to hug their thighs and try her best to do some good. Why? Why did things become so complicated? Gong Yimo turned around and looked at the city walls that were faintly visible in the dark night. Since she could not figure it out and there was no place for her in the capital, then she should just leave. Gong Dai clenched the letter in his hand. There was only 1 sentence on it. There are too many night watchers. There is no place for me in the capital. I am going to look for my master. Don't worry. Wait for me to come back. The handwriting was flustered and messy. It could be seen that she had written it when she was extremely flustered. It was impossible for her to be so flustered because she suddenly wanted to look for some master. It was also impossible for her to be so flustered because she was afraid of implicating him after seeing people repeatedly finding fault with her. The only possibility was, She found out. She found out that her closest family member had fallen in love with her. She could not accept it, so she left. She will not come back. Looking at Gong Dai's pale face, Lo Chi did not dare to make a sound. It was Shao Chi who could not help but whisper, "Your Highness, the princess should not have gone far. Let's go after her." Go after her? It was easy to say. Gong Yimo was not a weak girl who could not even trust a chicken. Her qinggong was outstanding. If she wanted to avoid them, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Seeing that Gong Dai did not speak, Lo Chi looked at him, who seemed to have lost his soul, and could not help but say, "Since the princess said she will come back, she will definitely come back. Your Highness need not be too worried. She won't come back." Gong Ju's lips suddenly lost their color. His eyes were empty as he stared into the distance. "She won't come back," Lo Chi sighed. Just as he was about to say something, Gong Dai clutched his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. "She will not come back, Your Highness." Luo Chi was shocked and hurriedly supported Gong Ju. Gong Ju's eyes were blank, and his lips and teeth were dyed red. He could only repeat over and over again, "I won't come back. Your Highness, don't worry. We will definitely find the princess and bring her back." His words caused Gong Ju to finally look at him. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and his face was pale and frightening. But he did not care. He only held on to Lo Chi and even smiled. "Help me find her. Then help me ask her, why? Why are you so cruel? Your Highness." Chapter 153. Gong Yimo's heart suddenly felt uneasy. She didn't know where this uneasiness came from and only felt flustered as she couldn't sort out her thoughts. But what she was doing wasn't wrong, right? Perhaps after coming here for a period of time, Gong Dai would realize that his way of thinking was wrong. Then when she returned, wouldn't everyone be happy? Just as she was immersed in her thoughts, a murderous intent suddenly appeared. She subconsciously dodged, and 3 hidden weapons hit the rock, creating sparks. "Who's there?" Gong Yimo turned around and realized that while she was deep in thought, she had already been surrounded. At this moment, a feminine voice was heard. "It's not in vain that we have braved the wind and snow to wait here for half a month. The situation in the capital is so tense, but Princess is still able to maintain her composure and wait for so long. It's really admirable." Gong Yimo looked at them and gave a cold laugh. "You're all waiting for me because of the bomb in my hands. Since you know the power of it and still dare to force me, aren't you afraid?" That masked, black-robed man smiled, and his feminine voice had a hint of seductiveness, as if he was throwing her a coquettish glance. "If Princess wants to make a move, we're naturally afraid. But now that we're so close to each other, unless Princess wants to perish together, otherwise, we can only have a real fight. I'm sure Princess is of noble birth and wouldn't want to fight to the death with our worthless lives, right?" Gong Yimo's heart sank. These were all men of sacrifice, so naturally they weren't afraid of death. But she couldn't die here. If she couldn't use the bomb, the other party had too many people and she might not be their match. "Ask the person in charge to come out and talk." That feminine man raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Everyone says Princess is exceptionally intelligent, and it's indeed a well-deserved reputation. Young Masterly, since Princess wants to see you, you don't have to hide anymore." Young Masterly? Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. She finally knew who had come. It was indeed Li Ku. He walked out of the crowd and tore off the black veil covering his face. After not seeing him for a while, he had lost a lot of weight and his eyes had become gloomy. He no longer had the gentleness and elegance that he had in the past, nor was he in high spirits when he talked about his ideals. It could be seen that after betraying her, he had not been living well. Seeing that it was him, Gong Yimo suddenly deflated and shrugged. "I've underestimated this woman, Long Xiangxiang. She actually sent so many people to guard this place for so long. I can go with you, but you have to promise me one thing." "What conditions?" Li Ku's voice was like sandpaper. It sounded very strange. He stared at Gong Yimo as if he wanted to see through her thoughts. Gong Yimo smiled. "It's simple. You can retreat 1 mile. Of course, you can block all my exits. I just want a quiet space to have a good chat with this Mr. Li. The feminine man smiled. Princess, you're making things difficult for us. You're such a smart person. We don't dare to let you out of our sight. At this moment, Li Ke suddenly said, I can agree to it. He took out a pill. This is muscle-weakening powder. As long as you're willing to take it, I'll let them leave. His words made the feminine man a little unhappy. After all, it was too dangerous. They were just following orders and could not go against their leader's decision. However, after thinking about it, if Gong Yimo really took the muscle-weakening powder, there was nothing to be afraid of, so he did not say anything more. Gong Yimo was slightly stunned. Li Ke took a step forward and said, Are you going to take it or not? Gong Yimo could not avoid Li Ke's intense stare. In the end, she smiled helplessly. I'll take it. Seeing that she really took it, the feminine man narrowed his eyes. He wanted to go back on his words, but was stopped by Li Ke. Jinshi, don't forget who's the one in charge. And you're just a sacrificial soldier. Jinshi narrowed his gloomy eyes and looked at the indifferent Gong Yimo. He said coldly, Do you know that if there's a what if, you won't be able to get away with it? Li Ke smiled coldly. So, there's no what if? Since he had said so, no matter how unwilling Jinshi was, he could only obey. With the order, everyone ran in 8 directions, leaving them a secluded place. The snowflakes swirled in the air, making the place even quieter. Gong Yimo sighed, Li Ke, aren't you afraid? With a flip of her hand, a pill appeared in her hand. When she took the pill, she had actually thrown it into her space. Now, she took it out again. Li Ke's eyes narrowed slightly, then he smiled palely. Whatever. Whether you take it or not, there's so many of us. You can't escape. Gong Yimo laughed. There are quite a lot of people, but aren't they scattered now? She swept her gaze over Li Ke, and unexpectedly, there was some coldness in her eyes. You'd better not make a sound, because I can definitely kill you before you can give a warning. She thought that Li Ke would be afraid when she said that, but she did not expect Li Ke to stand there quietly. When he heard what she said, he sighed slightly and seemed to relax. He finally smiled. This smile finally had a shadow of his old self. It was gentle and elegant, with a hint of ambition and caution. Whatever. Anyway, I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows curiously, but she heard him continue. Do you know what kind of life I'm living now? Gong Yimo said lightly, Aren't you the one who outshines others and has power and wealth in your hands? She always remembered that Li Ke had an older brother. He always wanted to surpass his older brother, but his family was strict. His father was afraid that the 2 sons would fight, so he had always supported his eldest son. Li Ke smiled weakly. The snowflakes fell on his face, but they did not melt. It was as if his heart had long been in a cold hell. Since young, I've always been more outstanding than my brother, and we're both legitimate sons. But because he has the word eldest, my father has always supported him and supported him step by step, hoping that he would be able to support the family in the future and bring glory to the family. Humph, with that idiot? He did not know martial arts and was wearing thin clothes in this weather. His voice was trembling, but it was not clear whether it was because of the cold or because of anger. And I'm ambitious and outstanding. He didn't support me, so I relied on myself. In the end, I became a scholar at the age of 11, until I was selected as the second in the imperial examinations. It took me 7 years to enter the Hanlin Academy, but I put in so much effort, studying day and night to become an editor, but I'm only a 7th rank official. And my brother, who is not very capable, became a 5th rank official because of my father's support. Why? We're both sons, but why is he so biased? I'm obviously ambitious, I'm obviously quick-witted. If I could exchange with him, I would definitely be able to make a name for myself and make a fortune. Until I met you. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.